Valar stood before the council chamber's great panoramic window, his 6 limbs clasped behind his back, staring out into the endless darkness. The void was out there, somewhere, creeping closer with each passing moment, devouring all it touched. He could almost feel it a whisper against his mind, a cold breath on the back of his neck. And yet, he knew it was not fear that made his skin tighten and his senses sharpen. It was something deeper, something buried beneath layers of his rigid, disciplined mind, an unfamiliar dread. "How do we fight what we cannot see?" Valar murmured, his voice barely audible but heavy with the weight of his thoughts. His antennae twitched, a rare sign of unease for a Xylari. The council room was bathed in dim blue light, reflecting the somber mood of its occupants. Around him, the other council members sat in silence, their eyes fixated on him, their leader. His words echoed within the chamber, resonating against the ancient stone walls as if they were speaking the truth of the ages, a truth they could no longer ignore. Councillor Zara broke the silence, her voice as cold and calculated as ever. "We cannot let fear cloud our judgment, Valar. The void is a natural phenomenon, no different than a black hole or a dying star. We must approach it with rationality, not emotion." Her multifaceted eyes shimmered with an eerie, unnatural calmness, a calmness that came from centuries of being taught that the universe could be understood, predicted, and controlled. Valar knew her words were an attempt to steady the room, to remind them of who they were, masters of an ordered civilization that spanned light years, unchallenged in their dominion. But he also knew better. This was no ordinary threat. The void did not obey the laws of physics. It swallowed stars whole, leaving behind only nothingness, a vast emptiness that stretched beyond comprehension. "The void is not a mere phenomenon," Valar replied, turning to face the council, his eyes locking onto each member in turn. "It is something else, something that defies our understanding. It does not consume, it erases. Entire worlds vanish, as if they never existed. We have lost communication with 3 outposts already. Entire sectors have gone dark. Our models predict that, within a decade, the void will reach our core worlds." His words hung heavy in the air, like a toxin slowly filling the lungs. The Xylari were a species that prided themselves on their control, on their ability to chart the stars and map the galaxies with mathematical precision. Yet here they were, staring into a darkness that even they could not measure. "Perhaps," Valar continued, his voice now a low growl, "we have been arrogant in believing our civilization to be eternal." A murmur spread through the council chamber, a rustling of robes and subtle clicks of mandibles. To suggest that the Xylari Empire, built on millennia of order and discipline, could fall was nothing short of blasphemy. But deep down, they all knew it. The void was coming, and there was no logic, no strategy, that could halt its advance. "We have one option," Valar said, his eyes narrowing, "and I know it will be met with resistance. But I ask you all to consider this: there are creatures in this galaxy who thrive in chaos, who have faced annihilation time and time again and emerged stronger." He paused, letting his words sink in. Humans. The name itself sent a shiver through the chamber. The humans were known across the stars as violent, unpredictable beings, creatures who seemed to find strength in disorder and chaos. The Xylari had always viewed them with a mix of fascination and disdain, a primitive species that defied the natural order with their reckless will to survive. "Humans are monsters," Councillor Zara spat, the word carrying a venom that seemed to cut through the air. "They would sooner see us burn than offer their aid. Their history is one of bloodshed and war." Valar did not flinch. He had expected this. "Monsters, yes," he agreed softly, "but monsters who have lived in the shadow of annihilation for their entire existence. What we call madness, they call resilience. What we see as chaos, they see as opportunity. If anyone can help us understand the void, it is them." There was a long pause, a moment in which the fate of their civilization seemed to hang in the balance. Then, from the shadows at the far end of the room, a voice spoke. It was Elder Thalar, the oldest member of the council, whose wisdom was said to span the stars themselves. His voice was like the creaking of old wood, slow and deliberate. "Perhaps it is time," he said, to reconsider what we know of monsters. A ripple of surprise went through the council. Elder Thaler had been silent for decades, his presence more symbolic than practical. But now, as he leaned forward, his gaze locked on Valar, it was clear that he understood the gravity of their situation better than anyone. Humans, for all their flaws, have survived where others have perished, Thaler continued. Perhaps it is time to learn from the chaos, rather than fear it. Zara's mandibles clicked sharply, but she did not speak. The chamber was filled with an uneasy tension, the air growing thick with unspoken fears and doubts. Valar felt it too, the weight of a decision that could reshape the future of their species. He turned back to the window, looking out into the vast expanse of stars. Somewhere out there, the void was moving, an unseen force that cared nothing for their laws or their order. He thought of the humans, of their stories, tales of survival, of entire civilizations rising from the ashes of their own destruction. They were a species that had always danced on the edge of the abyss, never quite falling in. And perhaps that was the key. Contact them, Valar said finally, his voice firm with resolve. Send an envoy to Earth. Offer them an alliance. If they refuse, we will have lost nothing. But if they accept, we may yet find a way to survive. Silence followed, but it was not the silence of disagreement. It was the silence of realization. The Xylari were not infallible. Their order, their control, it had blinded them to the possibilities beyond their understanding. As the council session ended, Valar remained by the window, his gaze lost in the stars. For the first time in his long life, he felt something stir within him that was not fear, but a strange, distant hope. Perhaps it was time to see beyond the void, beyond their own arrogance. To face a monster, he whispered to himself, sometimes you must become one. And with that, the decision was made. A cold mist clung to the skeletal remains of the derelict space station, drifting silently among the fractured metal beams and shattered glass panels. The station, once a hub of human ambition and ingenuity, was now a graveyard floating in the void. Commander Elaine Crow stood amidst the ruins, her breath fogging the visor of her helmet, eyes narrowed against the dim light filtering through the cracked windows. Why the hell did we agree to meet here, of all places? Lieutenant Marco Silva grumbled beside her, his voice crackling through the comms. This place gives me the creeps. Elaine didn't respond immediately. She stared out into the darkness of space, her mind racing through the implications of what was about to unfold. The Xylari had sent a message, a request for a meeting. But more than that, a plea for help. A sharp laugh almost escaped her lips, but she caught herself. The mighty Xylari, once the self-proclaimed rulers of order and civilization, now crawling to the monsters they so despised. She could hardly believe it. That's the point, she finally replied, her voice steady and calm. They're desperate, and desperate people make mistakes. I want to see just how much they're willing to risk. A dark chuckle came from Marco. You think they're gonna beg? I'd pay to see that. Don't get your hopes up, Elaine said. They're still Xylari, prideful, arrogant. Even in their despair, they'll be playing a game. A flicker on the radar caught Elaine's attention. 3 ships appeared on the screen, gliding silently toward them. Xylari emissaries, their sleek silver crafts glinting against the backdrop of the endless void. They approached in perfect formation, meticulous, calculated, a stark contrast to the haphazard wreckage of the human station. Look alive, people, Elaine ordered, her voice firm. Our guests have arrived. The Xylari vessels docked with a hiss of hydraulics and a thud of metal. Moments later, the airlock doors slid open with a groaning creak, revealing a small delegation of Xylari representatives. Their tall, insectoid figures moved with an eerie grace, cloaked in flowing robes that shimmered in the station's dim light. Their eyes, multifaceted and unsettling, scanned the room with what Elaine could only describe as a mix of contempt and wariness. Valar stood at the forefront, his presence immediately commanding attention. Elaine recognized him from countless intelligence reports, a Xylari leader known for his calculated decisions and ruthless efficiency. Yet now, there was something different about him, something that looked almost uncertain. Commander Elaine Crow, Valar's voice was like a low hum, resonating through the metal walls. "We thank you for granting us this audience." Elaine kept her face neutral, her eyes locked on Valar's. She could see the tension in his posture, the stiffness in his movements. This was not a creature used to asking for anything, let alone help from those he considered beneath him. "You came a long way to meet us in a place like this," Elaine said, her tone deliberately casual. "I assume it's important." Valar's antennae twitched slightly, a subtle sign of irritation. "We do not come here lightly, Commander. The situation is dire, and time is not on our side." Elaine crossed her arms, leaning back against a broken console. "Then let's skip the pleasantries. What do you want?" For a moment, there was silence. The Xylari delegation exchanged glances, a silent conversation passing between them. Elaine could see the disdain in their eyes, the barely concealed disgust at having to lower themselves to speak with humans. It was almost amusing. Valar's voice broke the silence. "There is a threat approaching, one that consumes all in its path. We call it the Void. It has already consumed 3 of our outposts, and it is moving toward the core worlds of our empire. We have no means to stop it." Elaine listened, her expression unreadable. She had heard rumors of a cosmic phenomenon, unexplained blackouts of entire sectors, whispers of stars vanishing without a trace. But the Xylari admitting their impotence, that was new. "And you think we can help you?" she asked, her voice laced with skepticism. Valar's gaze was unwavering. "Humanity has always thrived in chaos. You have survived wars, annihilation, and the brink of extinction more times than any other species in this galaxy. You find strength where others find only madness." Marco let out a low whistle. "Flattery from a Xylari. Now I've seen it all." Elaine's lips twitched into a brief smile before returning to her stoic demeanor. "And what makes you think we'd help you? Your people have tried to exterminate us more than once. What's in it for us?" There it was the heart of the matter. She watched as the Xylari struggled with their pride. It was clear they were desperate, and desperation was a powerful bargaining chip. Valar hesitated for a moment, and Elaine sawed a crack in his armor. "If the Void is not stopped, it will consume everything, including your worlds. We offer an alliance. Our resources, our knowledge, in exchange for your unique capabilities." Elaine chuckled softly, though there was no humor in it. "An alliance," she repeated, "between us monsters and your oh-so-enlightened civilization. I'm not sure you're ready for what that entails." Valar's mandibles tightened, but he held his ground. "We have no choice, Commander. This is not about pride or prejudice. It is about survival." Elaine's eyes narrowed. She could sense the fear underlying his words, the tremor of vulnerability in his voice. This was not the calm, collected Xylari leader she had read about. This was a being pushed to the brink, forced to confront a reality he could not control. "Survival," she echoed softly. "You know, I think that's one thing we might have in common after all." She turned to her crew, her gaze meeting each of their eyes in turn. "What do you think, folks? Should we help the aliens who once tried to wipe us out?" A murmur of voices rose over the comms, some angry, some skeptical, but all tinged with a grudging curiosity. Marco shrugged. "I say we hear them out. If they're desperate enough to come to us, maybe there's something to this void after all." Elaine nodded, turning back to Valar. "All right, let's say we agree to this alliance. What's your plan?" Valar seemed to relax slightly, though his posture remained tense. "Our scientists have developed a theory, a way to perhaps counteract the void's effects. But it requires a level of unpredictability, a chaotic element that we cannot simulate. We believe humans are uniquely equipped to provide this." Elaine raised an eyebrow. "You want us to be your wild card?" "In a manner of speaking," Valar replied, his voice carrying a note of begrudging respect. There was a moment of silence as Elaine considered the proposition. She knew the risks involved. Trusting the Xylari was a gamble, one that could easily backfire. But there was something in Valar's eyes, something that told her he wasn't lying. At least, not entirely. And what happens if we say no? Elaine asked, her tone deadly serious. Valar's gaze was steady. Then we all die. A heavy silence followed his words, filling the chamber with an almost suffocating tension. Elaine could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on her shoulders, the eyes of her crew watching her, waiting for her call. "All right," she said finally, her voice cutting through the tension like a knife. "We'll help you. But know this, we don't take orders, and we don't play by your rules. If we're going to do this, we do it our way." "Agreed." Valar inclined his head, a slow, deliberate motion. "Agreed." Elaine nodded, her mind already racing with possibilities, strategies, and contingencies. "Then let's get to work." The tension in the room seemed to lift slightly, replaced by a new sense of urgency and purpose. The Xylari delegation turned to leave, but Valar paused, his gaze lingering on Elaine. "You are not what I expected, Commander Crow," he said quietly. Elaine met his gaze with a level stare. "Neither are you." As the Xylari disappeared into the airlock, Marco let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. "Well, this is going to be interesting." Elaine chuckled softly. "That's one way to put it." She turned back to the shattered remains of the station, her mind turning over the events of the past hour. The Xylari were desperate, that much was clear. But desperation made people dangerous, and if they were going to survive what was coming, they needed to be even more so. "Get the crew ready," she ordered. "We've got a lot of work to do." As Marco moved to relay her orders, Elaine took one last look out into the darkness of space. Somewhere out there, the void was waiting, devouring all in its path, and for the first time, she felt a cold thrill of excitement. This was not just about survival, it was about proving, once and for all, that humanity was not to be underestimated. "Monsters in the dark," she murmured to herself, a small smile playing at her lips. "Let's show them what that really means." Elaine watched the Xylari emissaries disappear into their sleek ships, their presence leaving an uncomfortable stillness in the derelict station. The emptiness seemed to stretch out around them, vast and unyielding, like the very void the Xylari feared so much. She felt the gravity of their agreement settle heavily on her shoulders, but she also sensed an undercurrent of something else, an opportunity. "Marco," she called, her voice echoing through the comms. "Gather the crew in the command center. It's time we had a talk." Marco nodded, his face still half hidden by his helmet. "On it, Commander." He turned on his heel and began to signal to the rest of the crew, each of them springing into action with the ease of seasoned veterans. Elaine moved towards the shattered remains of what had once been the station's heart, the command center. Broken consoles and flickering screens surrounded the central dais, a reminder of the station's former glory. Now, it was just a ghostly relic, a place where humanity's desperation and defiance once mingled. She stood in the center, her gaze sweeping over the faces of her crew as they filed in. These were her people, the ones she had fought alongside, bled with, trusted with her life. And now, she needed them more than ever. As the last of the crew settled in, she took a deep breath and began. "All right, listen up. You've all seen the Xylari delegation. You've heard what they've asked of us. A threat they call the Void is moving through their territories, devouring everything in its path, and they think we can help stop it." A murmur rippled through the gathered crew, a mix of disbelief, skepticism, and dark amusement. Elaine held up a hand to quiet them. "I know what you're thinking. Why the hell should we help them? After everything they've done to us? After every life we've lost in battles against their fleets? The Xylari are no friends of ours." She paused, letting the tension settle. Her eyes scanned their faces, reading the lines of doubt, fear, and anger etched into their expressions. "But this isn't about friendship. It's about survival. If what they're saying is true, and this void keeps spreading, it won't stop with their worlds. It'll come for us next. And when it does, we need to be ready." Lieutenant Amara Vega, a sharp-eyed woman with a knack for engineering, spoke up. "And you believe them, Commander? You trust what they say?" Elaine met her gaze with a level stare. "No, I don't trust them. Not fully. But I believe they're scared. I believe they're desperate, and desperate beings don't lie when they're backed into a corner. Another voice piped up. Sergeant Owen Hale, a grizzled veteran with more scars than anyone could count. What's the play, then? We go along with their plan and hope they don't stab us in the back the first chance they get. Elaine nodded slowly. That's why we're going to do things our way. We'll work with them, but we won't rely on them. I want every ship checked, every weapon primed, and every strategy thought through. If the Xylari decide to double-cross us, I want us ready to turn the tables. Marco grinned, his rugged face breaking into a mischievous smile. So, the usual plan, then? A ripple of laughter moved through the crew, easing some of the tension. Elaine allowed herself a small smile. Pretty much. But this time, we're playing for higher stakes. If we succeed, we might just pull the rug out from under those smug bastards and save our own skins in the process. She looked out into the void beyond the cracked windows, her thoughts momentarily drifting. This void, she continued, her voice softening. If it's real, it's something none of us have ever faced. An enemy that doesn't have a face, or a fleet, or anything we can shoot at. It's going to take everything we've got to figure out how to fight it. And maybe, just maybe, we'll learn a thing or two about our so-called allies along the way. Elaine could feel the mood shifting among the crew. They were still wary, still distrustful of the Xylari, but there was a sense of purpose, now a spark of determination that hadn't been there before. All right, she said, straightening up. You know your assignments. Get to it. I want this station secured and every system operational in the next 12 hours. We're going to need every advantage we can get. As the crew dispersed, each heading to their respective tasks, Marco stayed behind, his expression more serious than usual. You think this void is as bad as they say? He asked quietly. Elaine looked at him, her eyes reflecting the dim light of the station. I don't know, Marco, but whatever it is, it's got the Xylari scared enough to come crawling to us. That's reason enough to take it seriously. Marco nodded, his usual grin replaced with a thoughtful frown. And what about Valar? You think he's telling us the whole story? Elaine exhaled slowly. I think he's hiding something. But right now, we need him as much as he needs us. We'll play along, but we keep our eyes open. The Xylari are many things, but stupid isn't one of them. Fair enough, Marco replied, a hint of his old grin returning. Just don't expect me to start trusting those bug-eyed bastards anytime soon. Elaine chuckled. Wouldn't dream of it. They moved toward the station's command center, where a handful of crew members were already working to bring life back to the aging systems. Screens flickered as they powered up, and the hum of machinery slowly filled the room. Elaine approached a console and began keying in commands, bringing up a map of the sector. A cold, dark emptiness stretched across the display territory marked as Xylari space, now turned into a dead zone. We need more intel on this void, Elaine said, her focus unwavering. Send a probe into that region. I want eyes on whatever's happening out there. If it's as bad as they say, we need to see it for ourselves. Amara, who was working on another console, nodded. I'm on it, Commander. I'll have a probe ready to launch in an hour. Elaine watched the display, her mind running through possible scenarios. The void, whatever it was, had the potential to change everything. Not just for the Xylari, but for every species in the galaxy. And for the first time in a long while, she felt a chill of uncertainty. What if it's not something we can fight? Marco asked quietly, breaking the silence. Elaine didn't answer immediately. She stared into the map, her eyes searching for answers in the vast darkness. Then we find another way, she said finally. That's what we do. We adapt. We survive. We've been doing it since the beginning. There was a long pause as the words hung in the air, each of them feeling the weight of the unknown pressing down on them. Let's hope you're right, Commander, Marco murmured. Elaine nodded, but her gaze remained fixed on the darkness of the screen. So do I, Marco, she replied softly. So do I. And as she stood there, the broken remains of humanity's once great station around her, Elaine Crow couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching them from the void, something ancient, patient, and hungry. She knew then that this wasn't just about the Xylari or their request for help. This was about confronting something beyond their understanding, a darkness that threatened to swallow them all. "Whatever's out there," she whispered to herself, "we're not running from it." And with that, she turned her attention back to her crew, her mind sharpening into a singular focus. They had a mission to prepare for, a threat to face, and a chance to show the galaxy what humanity was truly capable of. The air in the repurposed mining ship was thick with tension, a quiet hum of activity underscoring every corner as the crew of humanity's last hope navigated their new reality. The ship known as the Resolute had once been a simple vessel, designed to carve through asteroids and mine precious minerals. Now it was a mobile fortress, bristling with armaments and defenses, a testament to humanity's ability to adapt, to turn even the simplest of tools into instruments of survival. Elaine Crow stood in the heart of the ship, the command deck. Around her, the low-lit panels glowed with soft blues and greens, mapping out every function of the ship's systems. Her crew moved with precision, each person knowing their role and executing it with a fluidity that came from years of hardened experience. The recent negotiations with the Xylari had put everyone on edge, but they were used to operating under pressure. For them, pressure was just another day in deep space. She turned her gaze to the main display, where a holo projection of the Xylari emissary Valar flickered, his many eyes scanning the room with a mixture of curiosity and caution. The Xylari representative had requested to see how humans operated up close, a request Elaine had reluctantly agreed to. On the other side of the display, a smaller hologram showed an entire battalion of Xylari engineers working meticulously on some arcane device in the belly of their ship. The Xylari were the picture of order and efficiency, their movements almost mechanical. They worked in absolute silence, guided by what seemed to be an invisible hand of discipline and precision. A stark contrast to the Resolute, where a dozen voices overlapped as engineers and tacticians debated strategies and shouted orders across the deck. Elaine cleared her throat. "Valar," she said, her tone measured, "we're prepared to discuss the terms of this cooperation. But let's be clear, this is a truce, not an alliance. Mutual benefit is the only thing keeping this arrangement afloat. Understand?" Valar's eyes swiveled in unison, locking onto Elaine. His voice came through, calm but with an undercurrent of something sharp. "We comprehend your position, Commander Crow. But know this, the void does not distinguish between ally and enemy. It consumes all. If we are to face it, we must operate as one, or not at all." Elaine's eyes narrowed. "Then you'd better start understanding how we do things. We don't take orders, and we don't bow to threats. If we're going to work together, you need to stop with a high and mighty routine. We've faced extinction before. We didn't fold then, and we won't fold now." A silence fell over the deck, punctuated only by the soft beeping of the ship's systems. The Xylari emissary seemed to consider her words carefully, his many eyes blinking in a pattern that was impossible to decipher. "You speak of survival as if it is your greatest strength," Valar said slowly. "But survival is a paradox, Commander Crow. To survive, one must sometimes abandon principles. To adapt, one must sometimes betray what makes them whole. Is such adaptation truly a strength? Or is it a curse that forces you to lose pieces of yourself?" Elaine didn't respond immediately. She glanced at her crew, who had paused their work to listen to the exchange. There was truth in Valar's words, but there was also a misunderstanding, a fundamental difference in philosophy that was at the core of who they were. "We adapt," she said finally, her voice firm, "because we have to. It's not about losing who we are. It's about holding on to it long enough to find a way through. You think we survive by abandoning our principles? No. We survive by holding on to them, even when everything around us says we shouldn't. It's why we're still here, and it's why we're going to get through this." Valar's eyes blinked rapidly, a gesture that might have been confusion or perhaps some form of contemplation. "Perhaps there is more to your species than the chaos you project," he conceded. "More than you know," Elaine replied with a slight smile. "Now, let's get to business. What exactly are you planning to do about this void? We need a plan that takes into account both of our strengths, not just your way of doing things." The discussions that followed were tense. The Xylari preferred a highly ordered approach, emphasizing a defensive stance with precise calculations and minimal risk. Their strategy revolved around containment and careful analysis, a logical extension of their methodical nature. Elaine and her team, on the other hand, argued for a more aggressive stance, probing attacks, gathering intelligence, and exploiting any vulnerabilities they found. The two philosophies clashed repeatedly, each side growing more frustrated with the other's refusal to yield. Amara, the chief engineer, was visibly annoyed. "How do they expect to survive if they're not willing to take any damn risks?" she muttered under her breath as another proposal was rejected by the Xylari representatives. "They don't think like us, Amara," Marco said, leaning against a console. "They're not used to thinking outside their little boxes, but they'll learn or they'll burn." Elaine shot him a look, but didn't disagree. "Valar," she said, turning back to the Xylari emissary, "our ways are different, but that's not a weakness, it's a strength. Your order, our chaos, they can complement each other. We can be unpredictable where you are methodical. That's how we stand a chance." Valar's eyes flickered, his tone measured. "We will consider this approach. However, it requires a level of trust that does not yet exist between us." "Trust is earned, not given," Elaine replied. "And right now, we're both short on that commodity. But we've got a common enemy. Let's start there." A series of murmurs came through the Xylari's communication line. It was clear they were as divided among themselves as the humans were. Valar nodded eventually. "Very well. We shall begin with a small-scale operation to test this approach. We will provide a target, a fragment of the void's presence that we have detected in a nearby system. If you can demonstrate your method's effectiveness, we will continue. If not, we revert to our original strategy." Elaine nodded, satisfied. "It's a start." As the meeting ended, she turned to her crew. "All right, you heard them. We've got a job to do. Marco, Amara, get the weapon systems prepped and check our fuel reserves. We're heading into a hell of a storm, and I want us ready for anything." As they moved to their stations, she remained at the command deck, her mind turning over the implications of their plan. The cultural divide between humans and the Xylari was more than just a difference in tactics. It was a chasm in understanding. They saw humanity's adaptability as a threat, a sign of unpredictability. To them, survival seemed to mean staying within the lines, clinging to the rigid structures that had kept their civilization intact for millennia. But Elaine knew better. Survival wasn't about staying safe. It was about pushing beyond what was known, finding a way through the chaos, and coming out stronger on the other side. She didn't know if the Xylari could understand that, but they were about to find out. She stared out into the blackness of space, where stars blinked like distant, indifferent eyes. Somewhere out there, the void waited a force that didn't care for alliances or philosophies. It only consumed. And against that kind of enemy, there was no room for hesitation or fear, only action. "All stations ready," Marco's voice came through the comms. Elaine took a deep breath, her mind clearing as it always did before a mission. "Engage engines," she ordered. "Let's show these aliens what chaos can do." The Resolute surged forward, engines roaring as they hurtled toward the unknown and into the paradox of survival itself. The hum of the Resolute's engines was a constant, low drone that filled the spaces between thoughts. As the ship cut through the black expanse, headed toward the front lines of the cosmic void, Commander Elaine Crow stood in the observation bay, her eyes fixed on the vast, indifferent darkness beyond. She'd spent a lifetime in that darkness, fought through it, survived it, and sometimes felt like she had become a part of it. But today, the void seemed to stare back. The door hissed open behind her. Elaine didn't need to turn around to know who had entered. She could sense Valar's presence, a peculiar mixture of caution and curiosity. He had been watching her, observing her, trying to decipher the enigma of human behavior. Now he was here, seeking something deeper. "Commander Crow," Valar's voice echoed softly, his tone devoid of the earlier edge, "I find myself compelled by a question." Elaine turned, arms folded across her chest. And what question is that? Valar moved closer, his many eyes blinking in a slow, deliberate pattern. Your people have survived countless conflicts, even with your own kind. You've fought, bled, and died across the stars. Yet, you continue to choose war, to revel in conflict. Why? A bitter chuckle escaped Elaine's lips. You think we choose war? That we revel in it? Valar tilted his head, his eyes narrowing. Is it not the case? Your kind has been described as thriving in chaos. Elaine's gaze hardened, and she took a step forward. War isn't a choice, Valar. It's a consequence. A consequence of ambition, of fear, of survival. You think we revel in it? War leaves scars. Deep ones. Ones that don't heal. Valar was silent for a moment, considering her words. Yet, your species continues to expand, to dominate, to conquer. You build weapons designed for annihilation. You speak of honor in battle, and you name yourselves as protectors. What is that, if not a paradox? She let out a breath, her eyes drifting back to the void beyond the window. Maybe it is a paradox, but you've never had your back against the wall, have you? You've never had to look into the eyes of an enemy and see yourself reflected back. To see everything you've ever loved, ever known, about to be taken away. You don't understand what it means to survive like we do. You think we have not faced extinction? Valar's voice grew cold. We have lived through cataclysms. We have seen worlds burned. But we did not destroy ourselves in the process. We did not become monsters to survive. Maybe that's why you can't see the monster coming, Elaine shot back. You think peace is the natural state of things. But it's not. War, conflict, that's the true nature of the universe. Everything else is just a temporary lull. Valar seemed almost offended by her words, his posture stiffening. You speak of war as if it is an inevitable condition. But we have achieved harmony. We have maintained order. Are you saying that is a falsehood? Elaine turned to fully face him, her eyes intense. I'm saying you've built your order on a foundation that can't hold. Because when the real test comes, the kind that rips apart everything you think you know, you're going to see what's under all that order. And it might just be a monster. For a moment, there was silence between them, a deep, almost unbearable quiet. Valar's eyes reflected the stars, his expression inscrutable. And you, he finally asked. What lies beneath your order, Commander Crow? What do you see when you look into the abyss? Elaine paused, the memories flickering through her mind like a film reel she tried to burn away 1,000 times. I've seen what happens when the lines blur, when the difference between a protector and a destroyer gets lost. I've watched good people become monsters because they thought it was the only way to survive. Hell, I've been there myself. There it was the confession she hadn't intended to make, the truth she kept buried under layers of command and duty. She saw Valar's eyes widen, saw him absorbing her words with an intensity that was almost unnerving. You speak as one who has seen much suffering, Valar said quietly. Is that why you distrust us? Because you fear we will show you that side of yourself again? Elaine didn't answer immediately. Instead, she turned back to the void, searching its endless darkness as if it held some secret answer. I distrust you because I don't know what you really want. You say you want an alliance, but all I see is desperation. Desperate people make dangerous choices. Valar inclined his head slightly. And what of you, Commander? Are you not also desperate? Desperate to protect, to survive, to win? She shook her head. Maybe, but I don't mistake survival for victory. Winning isn't always about coming out on top. Sometimes it's just about making sure there's still something left when the dust settles. A silence settled between them once more, heavier this time. Valar seemed to consider her words deeply, his gaze turning inward. Your perspective is intriguing. I had not considered that survival could carry such weight, such contradiction. Elaine gave a dry laugh. Welcome to being human. It's all contradictions. We're creatures of conflict because conflict defines us. The trick is figuring out if we're fighting the right battles, or if we're just making new ones. Valar's eyes blinked slowly. Perhaps this is why you fascinate the galaxy so. You are not easily defined, not easily predicted. You are a paradox unto yourselves. Yeah, well, we're still here, Elaine said, her tone softening. Still standing, still fighting. Maybe there's a lesson in that. Valar took a step back, his eyes still fixed on her. And what lesson would that be, Commander Crow? Elaine's gaze never left the void. That survival isn't about purity or order or even peace. It's about finding a way to live with your choices. It's about understanding that sometimes, to protect what you love, you have to face the darkness inside yourself. And sometimes you have to become the very thing you fear. Valar studied her for a long moment, then nodded. Perhaps, in time, we will learn from each other, Commander. Or perhaps, in the end, we will simply destroy each other. Elaine turned to him, a small, tired smile touching her lips. I guess that's the gamble, isn't it? Valar inclined his head once more before quietly exiting the observation bay, leaving Elaine alone with her thoughts. She watched the stars outside, each one a distant, burning point of light, fragile and stubborn against the vast darkness that sought to snuff them out. And as she stared into the void, she knew that the real conflict wasn't just out there in the black. It was within her, within every human, within every Xylari, every living thing that had ever faced extinction and had to make a choice. The choice to fight, the choice to survive, the choice to face the darkness, even when it meant becoming a part of it. Elaine sighed deeply, her mind weighed down by the enormity of what lay ahead. She didn't know if she could trust the Xylari, and she didn't know if they would betray them when things got tough. But she knew one thing. The path forward wouldn't be defined by alliances or strategies or even survival itself. It would be defined by choices. And those choices, in the end, would reveal who the real monsters were. The void was a wound in space, an absence so complete it felt like a physical weight. On the bridge of the Resolute, Elaine Crow could feel it pressing down on her, a gnawing emptiness that defied comprehension. The viewport displayed the approaching chasm in all its terrible glory. The stars that dotted the expanse of the universe seemed to thin as they neared the outer boundaries, like the darkness was a black hole that even light was afraid to touch. The Xylari fleet hovered just behind the human ships, their formation tight and hesitant. Through the comms, Elaine could hear the uneasy chatter among their ranks, sharp, clicking sounds that were unmistakably laced with fear. The Xylari were not accustomed to fear. They had ruled their quadrant with the precision of their ordered minds. But this was different. The void was not something that could be reasoned with or controlled. It was an absolute negation. We're approaching the boundary, Lieutenant Rossi reported, his voice tight. He was leaning over the sensor array, his brow furrowed. Readings are all over the place. It's like the instruments can't get a lock on, well, anything. Elaine nodded, her gaze fixed on the darkness ahead. It's the void. Nothing in there obeys the laws we know. It devours reality. Rossi, it doesn't leave anything behind. There was a pause, a moment of silence that wasn't quite silent, the hum of the ship's systems, the faint crackle of the comms, the low, unsteady breathing of her crew. Elaine could feel their anxiety mounting. The humans were used to danger, but not like this. Not the kind that stripped away everything familiar and left them staring into a vast unknown. The Xylari emissary, Valar, broke the silence with his cold, dissonant voice cutting through the comm channel. Commander Crow, our ships are detecting gravitational anomalies at the edge of the void. If we get any closer, our propulsion systems may be compromised. Elaine's jaw tightened. She could sense the trembling uncertainty in his voice. If we don't get closer, we'll never understand what we're dealing with, she replied. We've got to push to the edge and get a look inside. If we stay back here, we're just waiting to be swallowed. Valar's hesitation was palpable, a rare crack in his usually resolute demeanor. To approach further would be to invite annihilation. That's why we're here, isn't it? Elaine shot back. To face this thing, not run from it. You wanted our help. Well, this is it. She could almost hear the collective intake of breath from the Xylari fleet, a species that had prided itself on its calculated decisions and unyielding control, now faced with a decision that defied all logic and order. Trust the humans, the very beings they had once feared as unpredictable monsters, to lead them into the maw of oblivion. "Commander Crow," Valar spoke again, this time with an edge of urgency. "Our people cannot—" "Enough," Elaine interrupted, her tone sharp and commanding. "Listen to me, Valar. This isn't just about you or me or any of us. The void is out there, waiting. We have to face it. Together. You brought us into this. Now, are you going to back down, or are you going to do what needs to be done?" There was a long pause, the silence so heavy it felt like the void itself was seeping into the comms. Then, slowly, Valar's voice returned, steadier this time. "What is your plan, Commander Crow?" Elaine exhaled, allowing a small, grim smile to cross her lips. "We're going to bait it," she said. "Send a probe into the void's boundary, loaded with a nuclear charge. We'll detonate it at the edge and see how the void reacts. We'll need precise coordination from your fleet and ours to pull back quickly and monitor the response." The bridge was dead silent. Rossi turned to her, eyes wide. "Ma'am, that's a hell of a risk." "Damn right it is," Elaine replied, her voice unwavering. "But it's the only way to understand what we're dealing with. And if we're going to survive this, we need to know what this void can do and what it can't." The Xylari's comms exploded in a flurry of clicks and murmurs, a clear indication of their escalating unease. Elaine waited, her fingers drumming against the console. She knew this was a long shot. The Xylari were not risk-takers, they were planners, strategists. But this wasn't a battlefield where plans could be meticulously executed. This was a leap into the unknown. "Commander Crow," Valar's voice cut back through, steady but laden with tension. "We will comply, but I must warn you our people will not tolerate recklessness." "Noted," Elaine replied tersely. "Get your ships in position." The crew of the Resolute sprang into action. The void loomed ahead, an unfathomable expanse that seemed to pulse and throb like a living entity. Elaine watched the sensors as the probe, rigged with its deadly payload, was launched from the forward bay of the human ship. It moved slowly, a tiny speck against the vast emptiness. "Probe approaching the void's boundary," Rossi reported, his voice tight with concentration. "All systems green. Detonation timer set to T-30 seconds." The joint fleet held its breath as the probe drifted closer to the boundary, inching toward the darkness. The moment it crossed the threshold, something changed. The stars seemed to bend, the very fabric of space warping around the void. It was as if reality itself was being sucked into a great, endless maw. "Gravitational pull is increasing," Rossi said urgently. "It's like the void is feeding." Elaine's grip tightened on the console. "All ships, prepare to pull back on my mark." The tension was a palpable thing, hanging heavy in the air. Seconds ticked by with agonizing slowness. The void seemed to stretch, to reach out with unseen tendrils, pulling the probe deeper into its embrace. 5 seconds to detonation," Rossi called out. Elaine's eyes were locked on the viewport, watching the darkness consume the tiny dot that was their probe. 3, 2, 1. Detonate. The viewport lit up with a brilliant flash as the nuclear charge detonated at the void's edge. For a moment, the darkness seemed to ripple, to convulse, as if recoiling from the explosion. But then, something happened, something no one could have predicted. The void moved. It wasn't a physical movement. It wasn't something that could be measured on sensors. But every instinct in Elaine's body screamed that it was alive, that it was aware. "Pull back, all ships, full reverse," Elaine shouted. The Resolute's engines roared to life as the fleet surged backward, away from the writhing edge of the void. The Xylari ships, too, scrambled to retreat, their sleek forms darting away like startled birds. The void continued to twist and contort, an eldritch, unfathomable force that seemed to defy all understanding. "What the hell is that?" Rossi muttered, his face pale. Elaine shook her head, her eyes still fixed on the anomaly. "I don't know, but it's not just emptiness. It's reacting to us. It's alive." Valar's voice broke through the calms, strained but controlled. "Commander Crow, what have you done? You've awakened it." Elaine didn't respond. She didn't need to. She could see it now. The void wasn't just a void. It was a presence, a hunger, a thing that lived in the darkness between stars, and they had just made it aware of them. "All ships," Elaine commanded, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Prepare for evasive maneuvers. We're not out of this yet." And as the void began to stretch and writhe, creeping ever closer like a shadow with intent, Elaine knew that whatever they faced out there was beyond anything they could have imagined. The void was no longer just a threat, it was a predator, and they were in its sights. The real battle had only just begun. The hum of the Resolute's engines filled the silence on the bridge, a low and steady vibration that seemed to match the tension coursing through the crew. They were still reeling from the encounter at the edge of the void, and the air was thick with an uneasy calm. Elaine Crow stood at the center, her gaze distant, staring out at the infinite expanse of space. Her mind wasn't on the stars, though it was somewhere else, somewhere buried deep in the past. She had always been a stoic leader, one who led by example and rarely spoke of what lay behind her hardened exterior. But as she watched the void's distant edge, now alive with strange energy, memories she had long buried began to surface, unbidden. Flashback. Earth, during the Xylari-human war. The sirens wailed through the city streets, an almost deafening chorus that mixed with the distant rumble of explosions. Elaine was only a cadet then, barely 21, her eyes wide and filled with a mixture of fear and determination. Her unit had been deployed to evacuate civilians from one of the city sectors under heavy bombardment. The Xylari warships hung in the sky like vultures, their dark hulls casting shadows over the ruined buildings. "Get them to the shelters. Move, move!" Elaine shouted, her voice hoarse from hours of barking orders. She grabbed the arm of a young boy, his face streaked with dirt and tears, and pushed him toward the line of evacuees. "Go, kid, go!" The roar of engines grew louder, and she looked up just in time to see a Xylari dropship descending from the smoke-filled sky. Her heart pounded in her chest as she raised her rifle, her hands trembling but steadying with a kind of resolve that came from necessity. They had drilled for this 1,000 times, but nothing could prepare someone for the reality, the raw chaos of war. The Xylari dropped from their ship in a coordinated assault, their insectoid forms sleek and fearsome, their weapons gleaming in the haze of smoke and dust. The first wave met a hail of gunfire from the humans, and the streets erupted into a full-blown battle. Amidst the chaos, Elaine saw her parents, her home being swallowed by the flames of a direct hit. Her breath caught in her throat. "Elaine," Sergeant Duran's voice cut through the noise. "Stay focused. We need to push them back to secure the evac." But her eyes were locked on the inferno, her body frozen. She could hear their voices, her mother, her father screaming for help. She knew she couldn't reach them. The heat from the fire seemed to blister her skin, even from a distance, a stark reminder of her helplessness. She stood there, rifle slack in her hands, until the screams were drowned out by the deafening noise of the battle around her. "Elaine, damn it, snap out of it," Duran shouted, grabbing her shoulder and shaking her violently. "You want to die here?" A gunshot rang out, and Duran staggered, a Xylari bolt having pierced his side. He fell to the ground, gasping, and Elaine felt something inside her snap. Rage, pure, unfiltered rage, filled the void where fear had been. She raised her rifle and opened fire, her screams mingling with the roar of the battle. She kept firing, even when her magazine ran dry, until the Xylari were pushed back and only the sound of crackling flames remained. That night, she stood before the ruins of her childhood home, her face blank but her soul screaming. The Xylari had taken everything from her, and in that moment, she vowed never to let herself feel helpless again. Back on the bridge of the Resolute, Elaine blinked back to the present, her face stoic as ever, but her eyes burning with a hidden fire. She glanced around at her crew, who were busy at their stations. None of them knew her story, not the whole of it. and she intended to keep it that way. Meanwhile, in the Xylari command chamber aboard their lead ship, Valar was deep in thought, his angular features drawn tight with a mixture of bitterness and reflection. The humans had acted with a recklessness that bordered on madness, yet they had also displayed a level of adaptability and bravery that the Xylari had never truly understood. As he mulled over these thoughts, his own past began to stir, like a shadow he could never quite shake. Flashback. Xylari homeworld, after the Great Concession. Valar had been young and ambitious envoy from a noble family known for its fierce warriors and defenders of Xylari honor. But his father, a prominent diplomat, had done the unthinkable. He had advocated for peace with the humans. He had seen the writing on the wall, a war with a race as unpredictable and tenacious as humanity could never end well. But his words fell on deaf ears. When his father's attempts at peace failed, and the Xylari command saw it as weakness, his entire family was disgraced. Valar could still see the moment replaying in his mind, like a vivid scar on his memory. The day of his father's sentencing, when he was stripped of his titles, his dignity, and sent into exile. "You have dishonored us all," one of the council members had spat, eyes filled with contempt. "To seek peace with such barbarians, you forget what they did at Norcale." His father, tall and proud even in disgrace, had only bowed his head. "We must look beyond the old ways. Our pride will be our downfall if we do not adapt." Valar remembered the burning shame he felt. At the time, he believed his father had been weak, a coward to even consider compromise with a species that seemed to know only war. But now, standing on the precipice of the unknown, staring into the void that threatened them all, he was beginning to understand. His father had seen a bigger picture, one that Valar had been too blind to recognize. But understanding did not come without its own kind of pain. His family had been outcast, their name marred, and his mother had died shortly after, unable to bear the dishonor. Valar had spent his life trying to reclaim that lost honor, climbing the ranks, becoming the envoy whose voice could sway a council. And now he found himself here, aligned with the very beings his father had once sought to make peace with, facing a threat that rendered all their past conflicts insignificant. Back in the present, Valar stood at the central console, his posture rigid, but his mind churning with thoughts. He knew he needed to speak with Elaine Crow again, to try and bridge this chasm of distrust that lay between them. They were both scarred by the same war, shaped by losses that had defined their very beings. Yet, perhaps, there was a thread however thin that could weave their stories into a singular purpose. He opened the comm channel, his voice calm, but carrying a weight that demanded attention. "Commander Crow," he began, "I believe there is much we need to understand about each other. More than this mission, more than this alliance. It is our past that drives us, and perhaps it is time we faced it." Elaine turned to face the view screen, where Valar's stern but contemplative face appeared. She could see it now. Beneath that stoic Xylari mask was a being who had faced his own trials, his own form of exile. She nodded slowly, her expression softening just a fraction. "Agreed, Valar. We've both been shaped by this war in ways neither of us would have chosen. Maybe it's time we confront what that means." Valar inclined his head. "Perhaps it is through understanding our past that we may yet find a way to survive our future." As the void loomed ever closer, its tendrils seemingly reaching out for any life that dared come near, Elaine and Valar stood at the edge of their own personal voids, the darkness within that shaped them. They were warriors, forged in the fires of conflict and loss. But perhaps, in this fragile alliance, they could find something more, something that could defy even the consuming darkness ahead. They both knew there were no easy answers. The void, like the past, could not simply be escaped. It had to be faced, understood, and, if possible, overcome. And it was in that shared understanding that the first steps toward trust, however tentative, began to form. For in the vast, unfeeling expanse of space, sometimes the only way to find light was to reach into the deepest parts of one's soul and pull it out, piece by piece. And in that, both human and Xylari were not so different after all. The void loomed before them like a living nightmare, a churning mass of darkness that seemed to swallow even the distant starlight. The void's edge was an ever-shifting boundary where reality twisted and bent. It was an abyss that defied understanding, an empty expanse that exuded a malevolent presence. For days, the human-Xylari alliance had approached cautiously, sensors scanning for anything that might hint at what lay beyond. But the void was a mystery that offered no answers, only dread. Elaine Crow stood on the bridge of the Resolute, her eyes focused on the swirling darkness beyond the viewscreen. She could feel the tension in the room, a collective unease settling over the crew like a thick fog. The humans were on edge, and the Xylari were no different. Their stoic facades barely concealed the anxiety rippling beneath the surface. "Anything on the scanners?" Elaine asked, her voice steady but tense. "Negative, Commander," came the reply from Lieutenant Ortega, his hands moving deftly over the console. "It's like staring into a black hole. There's nothing, and yet it feels like something is out there, waiting." Elaine nodded. She could feel it too. The void wasn't just empty, it was watching. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up, an instinct honed over years of conflict. She glanced at the comm screen where Valar's face was displayed, his expression hard but attentive. "Valar," she said, "any signs of movement on your end?" Valar's deep, multifaceted eyes narrowed slightly as he surveyed his own readouts. "None. But I sense a disturbance. The void is not a mere emptiness, it is a hunger, and it hungers for us." Before Elaine could respond, the void seemed to pulse, sending out a ripple of energy that shimmered like heat waves across the vast expanse. The screens on the bridge flickered, and alarms blared to life as the sensors finally picked up something moving within the void. "There," Ortega shouted, pointing at the screen. "We've got movement." From the depths of the void emerged shadowy forms, coalescing from the darkness as if drawn together by some malevolent will. They were indistinct at first, amorphous and shifting, like oil spreading across water. But as they moved closer, their forms began to solidify into something more tangible and far more terrifying. These entities seemed to defy logic. They twisted and warped as if the very laws of physics held no sway over them. Their bodies were a chaotic mix of sharp angles and fluid motions, their surfaces rippling like liquid shadows. They had no clear shape, but they had eyes, hundreds of them burning like small, baleful suns. "Contact! Multiple hostiles incoming!" shouted Ortega. "Distance, 500 kilometers and closing fast." Elaine's instincts kicked in. "Battle stations, prepare to engage." She turned to the Xylari envoy on the comm screen. "Valar, we're going to need your ships in formation with us if we're going to hold them off." Valar nodded, his expression grim but resolved. "Xylari vessels, form up with the humans. Prepare to engage the entities." The void entities surged forward, their speed far exceeding what either human or Xylari ships anticipated. They moved like predators, swift, erratic, and utterly without fear. The first wave hit the human Xylari formation like a hammer. Beams of coherent light from the human ships lanced out, while the Xylari vessels fired plasma bolts that crackled through the void. The void creatures twisted and split, dodging some of the incoming fire and absorbing the rest, as if it were swallowed by the darkness itself. "Damn it, they're adapting," Elaine shouted over the comms. "Ortega, switch to alternating fire patterns. Keep them guessing." The Resolute's guns blazed with fury, firing in sporadic bursts to throw off the entity's evasive maneuvers. Several of the shadowy forms were caught in the crossfire, their bodies bursting into dark, inky clouds that quickly dissipated. But for every one that fell, 3 more emerged from the void, their movements becoming more erratic and unpredictable. Meanwhile, the Xylari ships were deploying their unique maneuvering tactics, darting in and out with a grace that belied their size. They focused their firepower on the entity's apparent weak points, clusters of those eerie, burning eyes. Valar's command vessel, the Zethrin, led the assault, its energy lances piercing through several entities, causing them to dissipate in a burst of dark matter. "Humans," Valar said through the comms, his voice a calm amidst the chaos. Your heavy weapons focus them on the eyes. It appears to be their most vulnerable point. Elaine relayed the command. All ships, target the eyes. Focus fire, don't let them regroup. The combined firepower of the human Xylari fleet now honed in on the creature's glaring eyes. With each coordinated strike, another entity was torn apart, its body breaking into fragments that slowly disintegrated. The tide seemed to be turning. But then, the entities began to change tactics. They merged and reformed into larger, more complex shapes, horrifying amalgamations of limbs, tendrils, and writhing shadows. They lunged at the ships, striking with an unnatural speed and force. One of the Xylari ships took a direct hit from a creature's tendril, its shields flaring bright blue before collapsing under the strain. The tendril pierced the hull, and the ship erupted into a ball of plasma and debris. Valar's voice cut through the noise. Do not let them close in. Maintain distance at all costs. Understood, Elaine responded. Ortega, full evasive maneuvers, keep them off balance. The Resolute banked sharply, narrowly avoiding a sweeping attack from one of the larger entities. Its turrets swiveled and fired a concentrated barrage, tearing through the creature's mass, sending it into a spiral of disintegration. The humans and Xylari were learning adapting to the void's horrors as they faced them. For a brief moment, the battlefield fell into a strange silence, broken only by the hum of the ships and the crackle of damaged comm lines. Elaine glanced around the bridge, her crew tense but still focused. She knew they had only seconds to breathe. The void entities were relentless, their presence defying logic. Each time they destroyed one, more seemed to emerge from the void's depths. She opened a channel to Valar. We can't keep this up forever. We need a strategy, a way to hit them where it hurts. Valar nodded, his face partially obscured by smoke on his bridge. We need to disrupt whatever force is binding them. There is a central mass, do you see it? Deep within the void. Elaine peered into the viewscreen. Among the swirling chaos, she spotted a darker patch within the darkness, a shadow within the void that seemed to pulse with a malignant energy. It was surrounded by smaller entities, like a hive protecting its queen. There it is, she said, her voice steady. All ships, new objective. Focus fire on that central mass. It's our only shot. The human Xylari alliance rallied. Ships maneuvered into position, covering each other as they made their approach toward the central mass. The void creatures swarmed, but now the alliance was working in tandem, humans and Xylari moving as one, covering each other's weaknesses and playing to each other's strengths. Ortega, keep our aft covered, Elaine commanded, her eyes never leaving the viewscreen. Valar, watch our flanks. We're going in. The Resolute and the Zethrin surged forward, leading the charge toward the heart of the void. The creatures closed in, but the Alliance ships were ready. Coordinated volleys erupted from the fleet, blasting through the enemy lines. The central mass loomed closer, its pulsations growing frantic, like a monstrous heartbeat in the dark. Now, Elaine shouted, all ships, fire everything you've got. A blinding cascade of energy lanced out from the combined fleet, striking the central mass with immense force. It convulsed, rippling like a liquid shadow caught in a storm. The surrounding void entities seemed to falter, their movements becoming erratic and disjointed. The mass pulsed one last time before it collapsed in on itself, imploding with a deafening silence that seemed to reverberate through the void. The remaining entities disintegrated, their forms dissolving like mist in the morning light. Silence settled over the battlefield as the last echoes of the battle faded away. Elaine took a deep breath, her shoulders relaxing slightly. Status report. Ortega's voice was shaky but clear. Minimal damage on our side, Commander, and the Xylari fleet reports the same. We did it. Elaine nodded and turned to the comm screen, where Valar's face appeared, his expression filled with a mixture of exhaustion and something else, a hint of respect. Commander Crow, Valar said, his voice steady, it seems we are stronger together than apart. Elaine allowed herself a small smile. Maybe there's hope for us yet, Valar, maybe. For the first time since their uneasy alliance began, There was a glimmer of genuine trust, a bond forged in the crook ibble of battle. But both sides knew this was only the beginning. The void still hungered, and they had only just scratched the surface of its mysteries. As the fleet regrouped and prepared for whatever lay ahead, Elaine knew one thing for certain: they were ready for the next test, and whatever came next, they would face it together. The silence that followed the battle was a fragile peace, a lull in the storm of conflict. The void had been driven back, but its shadow lingered in the minds of those who had faced its terrible hunger. On the bridge of the Resolute, Elaine Crow stared out at the emptiness that stretched before them, her mind still racing from the recent combat. "Commander," Lieutenant Ortega's voice broke through her reverie. "We've detected something unusual on the Xylari ship. Valar's team has found ancient text in a hidden archive." Elaine turned to the comm screen where Valar's face appeared, looking worn but resolute. "Commander Crow," Valar began, "we've uncovered documents that could change everything we thought we knew about the void." Elaine's brow furrowed. "What kind of documents?" Valar's expression was grave. "Texts that suggest the void may be a consequence of our own civilization's actions. Hubris, arrogance. The texts speak of a great error made long ago." Elaine's heart sank. "Show me." The data was transmitted swiftly to the Resolute's central command console. The screen displayed an array of Xylari texts, their ancient script flickering as the translation software worked to decode them. The messages were fragmented, their full meaning obscured by time and damage, but enough was clear to strike terror into anyone who read them. One passage stood out, translated roughly as, "The void is the shadow of our pride. We sought to conquer the unknown, to harness the power beyond the stars, and in doing so, we unleashed a force that devours all. The void is our punishment, a reflection of our darkest sins." Elaine read the passage several times, trying to process the implications. If the void was a consequence of the Xylari's own arrogance, then the scale of their hubris was enormous. The very thing they feared most was born from their own actions, a cosmic retribution for their ambition. "Valar," Elaine said slowly, this changes everything. If the void is a result of your civilization's actions, it means your people are responsible for this terror." Valar's eyes were troubled. "Yes. The texts suggest that our ancestors attempted to control forces beyond our comprehension. Their experiments caused a rift, an anomaly that grew beyond our control. The void is their legacy, our legacy." Elaine could see the strain on Valar's face. "So, what do we do now? Do we tell everyone? What will it do to morale?" "That is the question," Valar replied. "The truth is a double-edged sword. Revealing it might shatter our alliance, but hiding it could lead to disaster if the void's nature becomes apparent to others. The decision is fraught with peril." Elaine took a deep breath. "We need to discuss this with our leaders. We can't keep this a secret forever." Valar nodded. "Agreed. But we must tread carefully. The knowledge we hold could ignite fear, anger, or even despair." In the command briefing room, the human and Xylari leaders gathered. The atmosphere was heavy with anticipation as Elaine and Valar presented the findings. The Xylari's representatives listened with a mix of apprehension and disbelief. "Are we to believe that this void is our fault?" One of the Xylari leaders, a stern figure named High Counselor Aelis, demanded. "That our ancestors' arrogance has led to this?" "It appears so," Valar confirmed. "The text suggests that our forebears sought to control cosmic forces and unleashed something beyond their control. The void is a consequence of that recklessness." Aelis's eyes narrowed, his expression a mask of anger and shame. "And you would have us accept responsibility for this horror? Do you think we are unaware of our ancestors' failings?" Another Xylari leader, a more reserved figure named Lyanna, spoke softly. "What do we do now, Valar? The void continues to spread. Do we confront it with knowledge of our own guilt, or do we focus solely on surviving?" Elaine took a deep breath before speaking. "We need to address the moral and strategic implications. If the void is a consequence of your civilization's actions, It may offer insight into how to counter it. We need to balance the need for truth with the necessity of action. As the debate continued, Elaine and Valar retreated to a quieter part of the ship. The philosophical and moral weight of the situation was settling heavily on their shoulders. "This is more than a strategic challenge," Elaine said quietly. "It's a test of our principles. Do we face the truth and risk fracturing our alliance, or do we conceal it and continue to fight in ignorance?" Valar looked out at the void through a porthole, his face a mask of contemplation. "Our ancestors' actions were driven by a desire for control, to master the unknown. Perhaps their greatest mistake was not understanding the limits of their power." Elaine nodded. "And now we're faced with the consequences of that arrogance. It's a hard truth, Valar. But it's also a reminder of our own fallibility. If we forget that, we risk repeating their mistakes." Valar's voice was filled with a deep sadness. "The price of knowledge is often heavy. We sought to understand and control, and in doing so, we unleashed a force that now threatens everything we hold dear. It is a lesson in humility." Elaine turned to him. "Then we use that knowledge. We learn from it and apply it to our fight. We need to find a way to address the void without letting it consume us literally or metaphorically." The next few days were filled with strategic planning and intense discussions. Elaine and Valar grappled with a decision of whether to reveal the truth to their respective crews and allies. The weight of the choice was almost unbearable, as the potential fallout was immense. Elaine gathered her senior officers and key Xylari representatives in a meeting room. The room was tense, the air thick with unspoken concerns and the gravity of the situation. "I've been considering the implications of what we've learned," Elaine began. "The void's origin and the responsibility of the Xylari are both heavy truths. We must decide whether to share this knowledge or keep it to ourselves." A silence fell over the room. The human and Xylari leaders exchanged glances, each weighing the potential consequences of their decision. "I believe we should reveal the truth," said Valar, breaking the silence. "Our allies have a right to know what we're facing and the origins of this threat. If we withhold the truth, we risk undermining our credibility and the trust we've worked so hard to build." Elaine looked at her crew. "What do you think? Do we reveal everything, including the consequences of our ancestors' actions?" There was a murmur of agreement among the human officers. "We owe it to our people to be honest," Ortega said. "If they know the truth, they can face it with the strength and resolve we've shown." Elaine nodded. "Very well. We will reveal the truth to our crews and allies. We must prepare for the fallout and be ready to support each other through the challenges ahead." The truth was revealed, and the immediate reaction was a mix of shock, anger, and confusion. The Alliance faced a new challenge, not just the void, but the moral weight of their struggle. The knowledge that their adversaries were partially responsible for the cosmic threat added a new layer of complexity to their fight. In the midst of this turmoil, Elaine found herself reflecting on the nature of knowledge and the burden it carried. Knowledge was both a light and a shadow, illuminating truths and casting darkness upon those who sought it. It could offer salvation or lead to despair, depending on how it was wielded. Valar, too, grappled with the implications. The Xylari had always prided themselves on their wisdom and control. Now, they faced the uncomfortable truth that their pursuit of power had led to their own downfall. The void was a mirror reflecting their greatest flaws, and the challenge was to confront it without succumbing to the despair that such knowledge could bring. "The void is a paradox," Valar said one evening as they reviewed the latest reports. "It represents both the ultimate destruction and the ultimate truth. Our struggle is not just against a cosmic force, but against our own understanding of ourselves and our place in the universe." Elaine nodded. "We must confront the void with both courage and humility. We face a force that embodies our deepest fears, but we also face the challenge of understanding our own limitations and the consequences of our actions." In the end, the price of knowledge was steep. It forced both humans and Xylari to confront uncomfortable truths about their past and present. But it also provided them with a deeper understanding of the struggle, They faced a struggle not just for survival, but for redemption and understanding. As the Alliance continued their fight against the Void, they did so with a renewed sense of purpose and resolve. They knew that the path ahead would be fraught with challenges and moral dilemmas, but they faced it with the knowledge that their struggle was a testament to their resilience and their commitment to overcoming the darkness that threatened to consume them all. The Void stretched before them like an impenetrable black curtain, a stark contrast to the glimmering stars that seemed so distant now. The Xylari fleet and the human vessels floated in a precarious balance between hope and despair, their alliance forged in the crucible of necessity and now tested by the weight of revelation. As Elaine and Valar moved through the corridors of the Resolute, the atmosphere was heavy with the implications of their decision to reveal the truth. The ship's crew and the Xylari representatives were still coming to terms with the knowledge that their struggle against the Void was not just a battle for survival, but a confrontation with their own past failings. In the crew lounge, Elaine found herself engaged in a quiet conversation with her senior officers. The room was dimly lit, a contrast to the stark reality of the Void outside. The crew had been affected by the revelation, and the sense of camaraderie had taken on a new, somber quality. "Commander, do you think the truth will help us or hinder us?" Ortega asked, his voice tinged with concern. "Now that everyone knows the Void's origins, there's a lot of anger and confusion. We need to keep morale up, but it's hard when people feel betrayed." Elaine sighed. "The truth is rarely easy to digest, but it's better to face it openly than to let it fester in secrecy. We need to channel this anger and confusion into our fight against the Void. If we allow it to divide us, we risk losing everything." Ortega nodded thoughtfully. "You're right. The Void is our enemy, not each other. We need to remind everyone of that." Meanwhile, Valar was engaged in a similar discussion with his fellow Xylari leaders. The revelation had shaken their confidence and stirred deep-seated fears. The Xylari, who had always considered themselves the epitome of order and control, now faced the uncomfortable reality that their ancestors' ambitions had led to their current plight. "We must unify our people," High Counselor Aelys said, his tone serious. "The revelation has the potential to cause panic and dissent. We need to present a united front and reassure them that we are not powerless." Lyanna added, "We must also emphasize the importance of our alliance with the humans. Our combined efforts are our best chance against the Void. If we fracture now, we will be lost." Valar agreed. "We need to focus on our common goal. The Void is a threat that transcends our individual histories. We must work together if we are to overcome it." As the days passed, the Alliance began to adjust to the new reality. The initial shock of the revelation gradually gave way to a renewed sense of determination. The crew and the Xylari worked side by side, their cooperation growing more seamless as they faced the looming threat of the Void. Elaine spent time with her crew, discussing strategies and reinforcing the importance of their mission. The tension among the crew was palpable, but Elaine's leadership helped to channel their focus towards the task at hand. She understood that their unity was crucial, and she worked tirelessly to maintain it. Valar, on the other hand, dedicated himself to bolstering the morale of his people. He spoke at length with the Xylari leaders, emphasizing the need for solidarity and resilience. He also held meetings with his fellow Xylari, addressing their concerns and encouraging them to view the Void as a challenge to be overcome rather than an insurmountable doom. In their private moments, Elaine and Valar continued to reflect on the implications of their situation. Their conversations were a blend of strategic planning and philosophical contemplation. "The Void," Valar mused one evening, "is a manifestation of our darkest fears. It represents the consequences of our actions, but it also holds a mirror to our souls. Our struggle against it is as much an internal battle as it is an external one." Elaine nodded. "We are facing the culmination of our collective hubris and our individual choices. It forces us to confront not just the Void, but ourselves. Our actions now will define who we are." Valar's eyes were thoughtful. "It's a profound lesson. We must act with humility and wisdom. knowing that our past mistakes have brought us to this point. But we must also have the courage to face the void and the resolve to change our fate. The Alliance continued to advance towards the heart of the void, their preparations and strategies becoming increasingly refined. The Joint Task Force had developed a plan to explore deeper into the void, seeking to understand its nature and find a way to counteract its effects. The process was slow and fraught with danger. Each foray into the void revealed more about its mysterious nature, but also exposed the crew to new threats. The void was a living, shifting entity, and navigating it was a constant challenge. One day, during a particularly tense operation, the Alliance encountered a previously unknown phenomenon within the void. It was a swirling mass of energy that seemed to pulse with a strange, almost sentient rhythm. The crew was awestruck by the sight, and the implications of this discovery were profound. "This could be a key to understanding the void," Elaine said as she observed the phenomenon. "If we can decipher its behavior, we might be able to develop a strategy to counteract it." Valar agreed. "It is both mesmerizing and terrifying. The void is more complex than we anticipated. We must approach it with caution and curiosity." The discovery of the energy mass became a focal point for the Alliance's efforts. Scientists and researchers from both sides worked tirelessly to study it, hoping to unlock the secrets that lay hidden within. The journey into the void had transformed from a desperate struggle for survival into a profound exploration of existence and purpose. The void represented not only a physical threat, but also a philosophical and existential challenge. It forced those who faced it to question their beliefs, their actions, and their place in the cosmos. Elaine and Valar's reflections on the void were a testament to the depth of their philosophical inquiry. The void was a mirror reflecting humanity's and Xylari's greatest fears and aspirations. It was both a source of destruction and a catalyst for profound introspection. In their moments of quiet contemplation, Elaine and Valar grappled with the implications of their struggle. The void was a symbol of the consequences of ambition and the complexity of existence. It challenged them to consider the nature of their own actions and the broader context of their fight. As Elaine gazed out into the void, she saw it not just as a threat, but as a profound opportunity for growth and understanding. It was a reminder of the fragility of life and the importance of facing one's own limitations. Valar, too, saw the void as a reflection of the Xylari's own journey. It represented the consequences of their past actions and the need for a deeper understanding of themselves. The void was a challenge, but it was also a chance for redemption and self-discovery. Their struggle against the void was more than a battle for survival. It was a journey towards self-mastery and a deeper understanding of the universe. The lessons they learned from their confrontation with the void would shape their destinies and define their place in the cosmos. The void remained an enigmatic and formidable force, but the Alliance's resolve was unwavering. They were ready to confront the darkness, to face their fears, and to discover the truth that lay beyond the edge of oblivion. The void's oppressive darkness stretched on as the joint fleet continued its perilous journey, a relentless reminder of the vast and consuming threat they faced. The alliance between humans and Xylari, strained yet holding firm, was reaching a critical juncture. Within the darkness of their combined vessels, another kind of darkness was taking shape, one that threatened to unravel their hard-won unity. Elaine stood on the bridge of the Resolute, her gaze fixed on the void outside. The silence of the bridge was punctuated by the quiet hum of the ship's engines and the occasional crackle of static from the communication channels. The Alliance's progress had been steady, but there was an undercurrent of tension that Elaine could not ignore. "Commander," Ortega's voice broke through her thoughts, "we've picked up some unusual signals from the Xylari fleet. It's not clear if it's just interference, but it's worth investigating." Elaine turned to face him, her expression hardening. "What kind of signals?" "It's difficult to say. They seem to be encoded, but the patterns are irregular. We're trying to decode them, but it's taking time." Elaine's eyes narrowed. "Keep me informed. We can't afford any surprises right now." Ortega nodded and returned to his station. Elaine felt a knot of unease in her stomach. The Alliance's fragile balance was precarious, and any hint of betrayal or deception could spell disaster. As she glanced around the bridge, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss. In the depths of the Xylari command ship, Valar was engaged in a similar conversation with his trusted aides. The mood was tense, and the air was thick with suspicion. "Envoy Valar, we've encountered anomalies in the communication channels," one of his aides reported. "There are encrypted messages that appear to be coming from within our own ranks." Valar's eyes widened. "Within our ranks? Are you certain?" "Yes," the aide confirmed. "The encryption is sophisticated, but it bears the hallmarks of internal dissent. We're working to identify the source." Valar's mind raced. He had always known that the Xylari were not immune to internal conflicts, but the possibility of betrayal at such a critical juncture was alarming. He knew that trust was a delicate thread, and any disturbance could unravel the Alliance's delicate fabric. "I want a full investigation," Valar instructed, "and keep this matter discreet. The last thing we need is to further erode trust with the humans." The aide nodded and left to carry out the order. Valar's thoughts turned to Elaine. Their relationship had grown from one of mutual suspicion to one of genuine respect and cooperation. The possibility of betrayal within their ranks was not just a threat to their mission, but also a personal blow. As the hours passed, the tension on the bridge of the Resolute grew palpable. Ortega's team had managed to partially decode the signals, revealing fragments of conversations that suggested a covert operation against the Alliance. Elaine's suspicion was confirmed: a faction within the Xylari was plotting against them. "Commander," Ortega's voice was tense, "we've identified a key player in the Xylari faction. Their plot is to sabotage the Alliance's efforts and undermine our operations." Elaine's heart pounded. The realization that there were Xylari working against them was unsettling. "What are their objectives?" "They believe that the humans are a greater threat than the Void itself," Ortega explained. "They think that by disrupting the Alliance, they can protect Xylari interests and preserve their own power." Elaine's mind raced. The implications were dire. If the Xylari faction succeeded, the Alliance would be compromised, and their fight against the Void would be severely hampered. But exposing the plot could also have unintended consequences. The Alliance was already on edge, and revealing the betrayal might push it to the brink of collapse. "We need to handle this carefully," Elaine said, her voice steady despite her anxiety. "We can't afford to act rashly. We need to find a way to expose the plot without causing a panic." Ortega nodded. "Agreed. I'll continue to gather information and keep you updated." Elaine's thoughts turned to Valar. She needed to consult with him, not only because he was an ally, but also because his insights into the Xylari could be crucial in navigating the crisis. Later that evening, Elaine and Valar met in a secluded conference room aboard the Resolute. The room was dimly lit, the only illumination coming from the soft glow of the control panels. The atmosphere was charged with urgency and concern. "I've uncovered something troubling," Elaine began, her tone serious. "There's a faction within the Xylari plotting against the Alliance. They see humans as a greater threat than the Void and are planning to sabotage our efforts." Valar's expression hardened. "I suspected there might be dissent, but this is more serious than I anticipated. Who are the key players?" Elaine handed Valar a data pad with the decrypted messages. "This is what we've managed to decode. The messages point to a faction of high-ranking Xylari officials who are orchestrating the plot." Valar reviewed the data with a growing sense of unease. "These individuals are influential. Their actions could severely impact our mission and the stability of our alliance." "Exactly," Elaine agreed. "We need to decide whether to expose this plot or use it to our advantage. If we reveal it, we risk further destabilizing the alliance. But if we keep it secret, we may not be able to prevent the sabotage." Valar's eyes were thoughtful. "It's a delicate situation. We must weigh the risks carefully. If we expose the plot, we need to ensure that we have a strategy to mitigate the fallout and maintain the alliance's cohesion." Elaine nodded. "I agree. We need to address the situation with a clear plan and a united front. The following days were filled with tension and uncertainty. The Alliance's efforts to combat the Void continued, but the shadow of betrayal loomed large. Elaine and Valar worked tirelessly to manage the growing mistrust and maintain the delicate balance between their people. During a strategy session, Elaine and Valar discussed their options. The room was filled with key personnel from both sides, each one acutely aware of the precarious situation. "We need to address the threat from within," Valar said, his voice resolute. "But we must do so in a way that minimizes disruption and maintains our focus on the Void." Elaine agreed. "We should consider a strategic reveal. If we expose the plot in a controlled manner, we can mitigate the impact and reinforce our commitment to the mission." One of Elaine's officers raised a hand. "Commander, if we expose the traitors, how do we ensure that the rest of the Xylari will remain loyal?" Valar responded. "We must demonstrate that our actions are driven by a desire to protect the Alliance and achieve our common goal. Transparency and accountability are key." Elaine turned to Valar. "Agreed. We need to prepare a message that conveys our commitment to the Alliance and our determination to confront the Void." As they prepared to address the Alliance, Elaine and Valar faced a moment of introspection. The situation had tested their resolve and challenged their perceptions of trust and loyalty. Their relationship had grown from one of mutual suspicion to one of deepened understanding and cooperation. "I've been thinking about what this betrayal means for us," Elaine said quietly. "It's more than just a threat to our mission. It's a challenge to our very beliefs about trust and loyalty." Valar nodded. "Yes, it forces us to confront the nature of our alliances and the choices we make. We must act with integrity and courage, even when faced with betrayal." Their discussion was a reminder of the personal stakes involved in their struggle. The Void was not just an external threat, it was also a reflection of their internal conflicts and the challenges they faced in their relationships with each other. The Void loomed closer, its insatiable hunger a dark presence that pressed upon the joint fleet with an ever-increasing intensity. The eerie silence of space was shattered by the sounds of alarm and chaos as the Xylari and human ships engaged in a desperate struggle against the encroaching darkness. Elaine stood on the bridge of the Resolute, her face illuminated by the flickering lights of the control panels and the harsh glare of the Void outside. The ship rocked violently as the Void's forces battered their defenses. Shadowy entities, once mere whispers of dread, were now fully manifested, their twisted forms a grotesque mockery of life. "Status report?" Elaine's voice cut through the cacophony of alarms and shouts. "Commander," Ortega's voice was strained, "we're taking heavy damage. The Xylari ships are holding their own, but we're losing ground. The Void's forces are overwhelming us." Elaine's heart raced. The reality of their dire situation was becoming painfully clear. The Void was not just a cosmic anomaly, it was an existential threat that sought to erase all in its path. The Alliance's combined strength was faltering under the relentless assault. As Elaine's mind raced for solutions, Valar entered the bridge, his face drawn with worry. The Xylari envoy's normally composed demeanor was marred by the visible strain of their situation. "We need to come up with a new plan," Valar said urgently. "The current strategy is not working. We're losing ships and personnel. The Void's forces are adapting to our tactics." Elaine nodded, her mind already working through possible scenarios. The stakes had never been higher. The very survival of both species depended on their next move. She knew that the situation required a bold, risky maneuver, one that could either turn the tide or seal their doom. "I have an idea," Elaine said, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. "It's a gamble, but it might be our only chance." Valar's eyes met hers, a mixture of skepticism and hope reflected in his gaze. "What is it?" Elaine took a deep breath. "We've detected a pattern in the Void's forces. They seem to be operating with a central node, a sort of command structure that directs their attacks. If we can disrupt this node, we might be able to weaken their forces and gain a crucial advantage." Valar frowned. And how do you propose we do that? We launch a coordinated strike, Elaine explained. We'll use the Resolute as a decoy to draw the Void's forces away from the node. At the same time, a small, highly specialized team will infiltrate and destroy the node. It's a dangerous plan, and we'll be risking everything, but it could buy us the time we need to turn the battle. Valar considered the proposal, his expression a mix of contemplation and trepidation. It's a high-risk maneuver. If we fail, we could lose everything. But if we succeed, we could shift the balance in our favor, Elaine finished. We'll need to trust each other completely. The success of this plan hinges on the cooperation and bravery of both our species. Valar's gaze hardened with resolve. I trust you, Elaine. Let's make it happen. The Alliance prepared for the desperate maneuver with a frenetic energy. The stakes were higher than ever, and the pressure was palpable. Elaine and Valar worked together, coordinating their forces and rallying their crews. The urgency of the situation left no room for hesitation. On the bridge of the Resolute, Elaine addressed her crew. Listen up, everyone. We're about to undertake a high-risk operation that will require every ounce of skill and bravery we have. We're going to use this ship as a decoy to lure the Void's forces away from their central node. Our goal is to create an opening for a specialized team to infiltrate and destroy the node. This will be dangerous, but it's our best shot at turning the tide. The crew, though exhausted and battered, responded with a mixture of determination and apprehension. They knew the risks, but they also knew that their survival and the survival of their allies depended on their success. Elaine turned to Valar. We're ready. Let's get this done. Valar nodded. We'll do our part. May our efforts bring the victory we so desperately need. The maneuver began with a cacophony of action. The Resolute darted through the void, its engines flaring as it engaged in a daring dance of evasion. The Void's forces, drawn by the decoy, converged on the ship with a relentless fury. The ship rocked and shuddered under the assault, but it held its course, a beacon of defiance in the consuming darkness. Meanwhile, the specialized team, a mix of human and Xylari operatives, prepared for their infiltration mission. They were a diverse group, their faces etched with determination and apprehension. They knew that their success or failure would determine the outcome of the entire operation. In the heart of the Void's territory, the team made their approach. The Void's central node was a grotesque, pulsating structure, its surface shifting with an eerie fluidity. The team moved with practiced precision, their every step calculated to avoid detection. As they neared the node, the tension was palpable. The slightest mistake could spell disaster. The team's leader, a seasoned human operative, gave a terse command. We're on the brink. Stay focused and be ready for anything. The team worked quickly, their efforts synchronized as they set the charges and prepared to destroy the node. The task was delicate, and the pressure was immense. The node's defenses were formidable, but the team pressed on, driven by the urgency of their mission. Back on the Resolute, Elaine and Valar watched the unfolding battle with bated breath. The decoy maneuver was working, but the price was steep. The ship was taking heavy damage, and the crew's endurance was being tested to its limits. We're holding our ground, but we can't keep this up forever, Ortega reported. The Void's forces are relentless. Elaine nodded, her mind racing as she monitored the team's progress. The success of their plan depended on the team's ability to destroy the node and disrupt the Void's command structure. As the minutes ticked by, the team's leader signaled that they were ready to initiate the detonation. Elaine's heart pounded as she waited for the signal. The tension in the bridge was almost unbearable, the fate of the operation hanging by a thread. The moment of truth arrived. The team triggered the detonation, and the node erupted in a burst of blinding light and energy. The shockwave rippled through the Void's forces, sending shockwaves of disruption through their ranks. Elaine and Valar watched as the Void's forces faltered, their cohesion shattered by the destruction of their central node. The battle was far from over, but the tide had shifted. The Alliance had gained a crucial advantage, and the Void's relentless assault was momentarily halted. In the aftermath of the battle, the Alliance regrouped and assessed the damage. The Resolute was heavily damaged, but it had survived. The specialized team had accomplished their mission, and their bravery had turned the tide of the battle. Elaine and Valar stood together on the bridge, their expressions reflecting a mix of relief and exhaustion. The operation had been a success, but the cost had been significant. "We did it," Elaine said, her voice weary but triumphant. "We've gained the upper hand." Valar nodded, his eyes reflecting a deep sense of satisfaction and resolve. "Yes, but the fight is far from over. We must continue to stand together and press on." The Resolute drifted in the void's ominous shadow, a battered relic of defiance. The crew's exhaustion was palpable, their faces etched with the strain of a battle that had tested every limit. Yet, amid the chaos, a flicker of hope began to emerge. The void's forces had been momentarily disrupted, but the threat remained. Elaine gathered her senior officers in the ship's war room. The atmosphere was tense, a mixture of relief and apprehension. The data from the recent battle streamed across the holographic displays, painting a grim picture of their continued struggle. "We've bought ourselves some breathing room," Elaine said, her voice resolute despite the fatigue. "But the void isn't going to just go away. We need a new strategy, and we need it now." Ortega, her tactical officer, nodded. "The disruption of the central node gave us a temporary advantage, but the void's forces are regrouping. We have to assume they'll adapt to our tactics." Valar, standing beside Elaine, looked over the data with a thoughtful expression. "Our previous approach bought us time, but it's clear that we're facing an adversary capable of swift adaptation. We need to strike while we have the chance." Elaine's eyes met Valar's, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. Their alliance was still fragile, but the success of their joint operation had strengthened the bond, if only slightly. "What do you suggest, Valar?" Valar took a deep breath. "We need to identify the void's weaknesses and exploit them. The disruption of the node was a significant blow, but it's also likely that the void's forces will be on high alert. We need to be prepared for their countermeasures." Elaine nodded. "Agreed. We'll need to analyze the data from the battle and find any patterns or vulnerabilities we can exploit. We also need to prepare for the possibility that the void may have reinforcements or new strategies." As the team dispersed to carry out their tasks, Elaine and Valar remained behind, their conversation a private exchange of thoughts and concerns. "We've managed to keep the Alliance together through this crisis," Valar said, his voice low. "But I'm worried about the long term. How do we maintain unity when the threat is so persistent?" Elaine's gaze was distant, her mind reflecting on the broader implications of their struggle. "Unity isn't just about surviving this battle. It's about proving to ourselves and each other that we can face adversity together. If we can show that we're stronger as a unified force, we might be able to sustain this alliance beyond the immediate crisis." Valar nodded, a glimmer of understanding in his eyes. "It's a difficult balance. Trust isn't something that can be forged overnight, especially when the stakes are so high. But if we can navigate this turning point together, we might be able to build a foundation for a lasting alliance." As the hours passed, the Alliance's efforts intensified. The Resolute's crew worked tirelessly, analyzing data and refining their strategy. The Xylari forces, though battered, continued to contribute valuable intelligence and support. In the midst of the frantic activity, Elaine found a moment of solitude in her quarters. She stared out at the vast emptiness of space, her thoughts consumed by the weight of their predicament. The void was more than a cosmic threat. It was a reflection of their deepest fears and uncertainties. Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft chime. Valar's voice came through the comm system. "Elaine, I have something to show you. It might be the breakthrough we need." Elaine responded immediately, making her way to the ship's conference room. Valar was already there, accompanied by a holographic display of the data they had gathered. "What have you found?" Elaine asked as she approached. Valar gestured to the display. "I've been analyzing the void's patterns and behavior. It appears that the disruption of the central node created a ripple effect that exposed a critical weakness in their command structure. If we can exploit this weakness, we might be able to gain a decisive advantage. Elaine studied the data, her eyes narrowing as she absorbed the information. This could be the breakthrough we need. What's the plan? Valar outlined a bold strategy. We'll launch a coordinated assault targeting the exposed vulnerability. It will require precise timing and coordination between our forces. We'll need to be prepared for a fierce counterattack, but if we succeed, we might be able to turn the tide of the battle in our favor. Elaine's mind raced as she considered the implications. The plan was risky, but it offered a chance to shift the balance of power. Let's move forward with it. We need to brief our teams and prepare for the next phase of the operation. The Alliance mobilized with renewed determination. The plan was set into motion, and the crews of both the Resolute and the Xylari ships worked together with a sense of purpose. The tension was palpable as they prepared for the crucial assault. As the operation commenced, the fleet moved into position, their formations carefully arranged to maximize their effectiveness. The Void's forces, still reeling from the previous disruption, were caught off guard by the sudden offensive. Elaine and Valar coordinated their efforts from the bridge of the Resolute, their commands precise and decisive. The battle unfolded with a frenetic energy, the combined firepower of the Alliance striking at the heart of the Void's command structure. The Void's forces fought back fiercely, their attacks a relentless torrent of darkness and devastation. Yet, the Alliance's coordinated assault proved effective, targeting the critical weakness identified in the Void's structure. Amidst the chaos of battle, Elaine and Valar worked in tandem, their leadership and strategy guiding their forces through the storm. The stakes were high, and the outcome of the battle hung in the balance. As the assault reached its climax, the Void's forces began to falter. The coordinated strike had achieved its objective, dealing a significant blow to the Void's command structure. The tide of the battle began to turn, and the Alliance gained a crucial upper hand. In the aftermath of the battle, the Alliance regrouped and assessed the results. The victory had come at a cost, but it marked a significant turning point in their struggle against the Void. Elaine and Valar stood together on the bridge, their expressions a mixture of relief and resolve. "We've made progress," Elaine said, her voice reflecting the weight of their recent efforts. "But the fight is far from over. We need to stay vigilant and continue to build on our success." Valar nodded, his eyes reflecting a deep sense of determination. "Yes, the Void's threat is still present, but we've proven that our alliance can achieve great things. We must continue to work together and press on." The aftermath of the gamble left a somber silence that echoed through the Void. The Resolute and its Xylari counterparts had emerged victorious, but the victory had come at a grievous cost. The once proud ships were now battle-scarred and weary, their crews battered both physically and emotionally. The Alliance, though intact, was now fraught with fragility. Elaine Crow stood in the dimly lit command center of the Resolute, staring at the flickering holographic displays that painted a grim picture of the recent battle. The victory had been hard-won, but the price had been steep. Losses on both sides had left a tangible void of grief and uncertainty. Her first officer, Ortega, approached with a grim expression. "The damage reports are in. We've lost several good people. The Xylari have suffered similarly. The cost of this victory is heavier than we anticipated." Elaine nodded, her eyes reflecting the weight of the news. "Prepare a message for the crew. We need to acknowledge their sacrifice and remind them why we're fighting." As Ortega moved to carry out the task, Elaine took a moment to compose herself. The strain of leadership had never been more evident, the burden of responsibility pressing heavily on her shoulders. The Alliance was a fragile construct, held together by the threads of necessity rather than trust. The recent victory had been a testament to their collective strength, but it had also exposed the deep fissures that lay beneath. The Xylari ship, Eclipsar, mirrored the somber atmosphere of the Resolute. Valar paced the length of the bridge, his thoughts a turbulent storm. The battle had tested his people in ways they had not anticipated. The losses were felt deeply, and the strain on their alliance with the humans was evident in every interaction. He turned to his second-in-command, Lyra, who was absorbed in the data feeds. How are the crews holding up? Lyra's voice was tinged with fatigue. They're struggling. The loss of our comrades has left a palpable sense of despair. Many are questioning whether the alliance with the humans was worth the cost. Valar's expression darkened. I understand their concerns. We've made sacrifices, but we need to remind them why we're here. We cannot afford to let this fragile alliance fall apart. Elaine and Valar convened in a neutral meeting room on the Resolute. The atmosphere was tense, their previous camaraderie overshadowed by the recent loss and growing discord. As they faced each other, their expressions were a mixture of resolve and sorrow. Elaine broke the silence. Valar, we need to address the situation. The alliance is strained, and the losses have left both our people reeling. We need to find a way to heal these wounds and reaffirm our commitment to each other. Valar nodded solemnly. Agreed. The cost of our victory has laid bare the vulnerabilities in our alliance. We must confront these issues head-on if we are to continue fighting together. Elaine's gaze was resolute. We've seen what can be achieved when we work as one, but we've also seen the limits of that unity. It's clear that trust between our people is still in its infancy. We need to build a foundation that goes beyond necessity. Valar's eyes held a weary determination. It's a difficult task. The recent losses have left a deep scar on both our people. We must acknowledge the pain and work through it. We need to foster understanding and respect if we're to move forward. The following days were marked by intense and emotional confrontations. The crews of the Resolute and the Eclipsar engaged in a series of meetings, discussions, and shared moments of grief. The raw emotions of the recent battle came to the forefront, revealing the vulnerabilities and fears of both sides. Elaine held a memorial service for the fallen crew members. The ceremony was a somber reflection on their sacrifices, a moment to honor their memory and acknowledge the cost of the victory. The service brought both humans and Xylari together, their shared grief a testament to their common struggle. Valar, too, addressed his people. His speech was a poignant reminder of the stakes involved, a call to continue the fight despite the heavy losses. He emphasized the importance of their alliance and the need to support each other through the darkest times. In the quiet moments between the formal proceedings, Elaine and Valar found themselves in introspective conversations. They discussed their personal fears, the impact of their actions, and the uncertain future that lay ahead. These conversations were marked by an elegant, introspective prose that reflected their deep-seated anxieties and hopes. Elaine confided in Valar about her fears of leading her people through a prolonged conflict. Sometimes I wonder if we're truly making a difference. The cost of this war is so great, and I can't help but question whether we're moving towards a better future or simply extending our suffering. Valar's response was a philosophical reflection on the nature of conflict and survival. The fragility of our alliance mirrors the fragility of our existence. We are constantly confronted with the paradox of survival, how to persist in the face of overwhelming odds while maintaining our principles and humanity. The conversations between Elaine and Valar became a space for mutual understanding, where they could openly express their fears and doubts. Their shared experiences and struggles deepened their connection, revealing the complexities of their characters and the weight of their decisions. The Resolute and the Eclipsar approached the Void's core with a mix of dread and determination. The once feared abyss now loomed before them, an enormous, consuming blackness that seemed to stretch endlessly into the unknown. As they crossed the threshold, the ship's lights flickered, struggling to cut through the oppressive darkness. Inside the command center of the Resolute, Elaine Crow and Valar stood side by side, their faces etched with a mixture of fear and resolve. The Void was no longer a distant threat. It had become their immediate reality, a nightmarish environment that tested their very sanity. Elaine's gaze was fixed on the view screen, where the Void's core appeared as an immense swirling vortex of nothingness. "This is it," she said, her voice steady despite the turmoil within. "We're entering the heart of the abyss. It's time to face whatever lies within." Valar's eyes, usually so composed, now betrayed a flicker of apprehension. "We've prepared for this, but nothing can truly ready us for what we might encounter. The void is more than just a physical phenomenon. It's a reflection of our deepest fears. As they advanced deeper into the void, the environment became increasingly surreal. The darkness seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy, and the ship's sensors began to malfunction. Reality itself seemed to warp, the familiar boundaries of space-time dissolving into an incomprehensible expanse. Elaine found herself grappling with the psychological horror of the void. The darkness seemed to seep into her thoughts, amplifying her deepest insecurities and fears. Her mind conjured unsettling visions, memories of past battles, the faces of fallen comrades, and the endless questions of whether she had truly made a difference. The ship's corridors seemed to twist and distort, reflecting the chaos within her mind. Elaine stumbled through the shifting hallways, her breaths coming in ragged gasps. She grappled with the haunting thought that she was failing not only her crew, but also herself. Each step felt like a struggle against an invisible force, a force that sought to break her will. In the midst of this personal torment, Elaine heard a voice soft and ethereal, echoing from the darkness. "You have faced so many battles, yet here you are, lost in the shadows of your own fears." Elaine spun around, but the voice seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. "Who's there?" she demanded, but the darkness offered no answers. The voice continued to taunt her, digging deeper into her insecurities, forcing her to confront the very essence of her fears. Valar faced his own demons as the void's core drew closer. The Xylari envoy was deeply troubled by the revelations of the previous chapters, the texts that hinted at the void being a consequence of his people's arrogance. As they ventured further into the abyss, Valar grappled with the weight of this knowledge. In the Xylari quarters of the ship, Valar sat alone, surrounded by holographic projections of ancient text and data. The darkness seemed to close in on him, and the projections flickered erratically. He saw visions of his people's past, scenes of grandeur and hubris, of the very empire that had sought to dominate and control. Valar's internal struggle was palpable. He questioned his own role in perpetuating the cycle of destruction. Was he complicit in his people's sins, or was he merely a product of a flawed civilization? The very core of his identity seemed to unravel as he faced the unsettling truth that their current predicament might be the result of their own making. As the Resolute and Eclipsar navigated the heart of the void, the tension reached a crescendo. The ship's systems struggled to maintain their integrity, and the crew faced an unrelenting barrage of psychological and physical strain. The void's core seemed to be an ever-shifting entity, its darkness swallowing everything in its path. Elaine and Valar's paths converged as they both faced their personal demons in the heart of the void. Their experiences, though distinct, were deeply intertwined. They had both been pushed to their limits, and their mutual struggle had forged a new understanding between them. In a brief moment of respite, Elaine and Valar met in a secluded part of the ship, their faces showing the weariness of their ordeal. "We're not just facing the void," Elaine said, her voice hoarse but resolute. "We're confronting everything that we've tried to hide from ourselves." Valar nodded, his expression mirroring her exhaustion. "The void is a reflection of our darkest fears. It's testing us in ways we never anticipated, but it's also showing us our own capacity for courage and resilience." As they neared the heart of the void, the very essence of their mission was put to the ultimate test. The environment grew increasingly hostile, and the psychological pressure on the crew became nearly unbearable. Yet, amidst the chaos, Elaine and Valar found a new sense of purpose, a deeper understanding of their own limits and the nature of their struggle. The core of the void loomed ahead, an unfathomable expanse of consuming darkness that seemed to devour all light and hope. As the Resolute and Eclipsar approached, the very fabric of reality seemed to stretch and warp, creating a disorienting environment where even the most basic concepts of space and time were rendered meaningless. Elaine and Valar, standing side by side in the command center of the Resolute, felt the weight of the void's core pressing upon them. The command center was bathed in a dim, eerie glow from the ship's failing lights, adding to the oppressive atmosphere. The crew worked in tense silence, their faces a mix of determination and dread. Elaine glanced at Valar, his usually composed demeanor now showing cracks. "We're about to cross the threshold," she said, her voice strained but resolute. "Once we enter the core, there's no turning back. Are you ready for this?" Valar's gaze was fixed on the view screen, where the swirling darkness seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy. "I've never faced anything like this before," he admitted, "but we have to confront it, not just for ourselves, but for the survival of both our peoples." As they crossed into the heart of the void, the environment became increasingly surreal. The darkness was so complete that it seemed to absorb all sense of direction and orientation. The ship's systems continued to falter, and the crew members struggled to maintain their footing as the very walls of the vessel appeared to undulate and shift. Elaine felt an unsettling chill as she moved through the ship's corridors. The oppressive darkness seemed to seep into her thoughts, amplifying her fears and anxieties. Memories of past battles and lost comrades resurfaced with brutal clarity. Each step felt like a journey through her own nightmares. In one of the ship's dimly lit rooms, Elaine encountered a holographic projection of her past. The projection showed scenes of fierce combat, the faces of enemies and allies alike, and the chaos of war. Elaine's heart raced as she faced these haunting memories. She saw herself as a soldier, driven by duty and fear, but now faced with the profound realization of how war had shaped her. Valar, too, faced his own demons as the void's core drew nearer. He wandered through the Xylari quarters, surrounded by holographic displays of his people's history and the ancient texts they had uncovered. The text flickered and shifted, showing scenes of Xylari arrogance and conquest. Valar saw the rise and fall of his civilization, the hubris that had led to their current predicament. The Xylari envoy's internal struggle was evident. He questioned the very foundation of his beliefs and his role in the cycle of destruction. Was he a pawn in a larger scheme, or was he capable of changing the course of his people's history? The void seemed to challenge not only his physical endurance, but also the very essence of his identity. As the Resolute and Eclipsar ventured deeper into the void, the crew faced increasingly dire conditions. The environment seemed to distort their perceptions, creating a nightmarish landscape where reality and illusion blended seamlessly. The ship's systems continued to malfunction, and the crew's mental and emotional stability was pushed to the breaking point. Elaine and Valar worked together to maintain order amid the chaos. Their interaction, once marked by distrust and tension, had evolved into a tentative partnership forged through shared hardship. They understood each other's strengths and weaknesses, and their growing bond was evident as they faced the void's horrors side by side. In one critical moment, Elaine and Valar found themselves in the ship's control room, where they had to make a crucial decision. The void's core seemed to be reacting to their presence, its darkness pulsating with an almost sentient malevolence. "We need to find a way to stabilize the ship," Elaine said, her voice resolute despite the turmoil around her. "If we lose control now, we'll be lost to the void." Valar nodded, his expression grim but determined. "I've been analyzing the data from the ancient texts. There might be a way to harness the void's energy, but it's risky. It could either stabilize the ship or tear it apart." Elaine's mind raced as she considered their options. The stakes were impossibly high, and the consequences of failure were dire. "We don't have much time," she said. "We need to act now, but we have to be prepared for anything." As they worked together to implement the risky maneuver, the tension in the control room was palpable. The ship's systems struggled to cope with the fluctuations in energy, and the crew's anxiety mounted as they faced the unknown. The environment outside the ship continued to shift and warp, creating a disorienting and terrifying experience. Elaine and Valar's combined efforts were a testament to their growing trust and understanding. Their actions were precise and coordinated, reflecting their newfound respect for each other's skills. Despite the chaos and uncertainty, they found a sense of purpose in their collaboration. Elaine and Valar faced their ultimate challenge. The environment was a swirling vortex of darkness, its malevolent energy pushing against their every effort. The ship's systems were pushed to their limits, and the crew's resolve was tested as never before. Elaine felt a deep sense of isolation as she looked out into the void. The darkness seemed to swallow all light and hope, creating an overwhelming sense of despair. Yet, in the midst of this despair, she found a flicker of determination. She knew that their struggle was not just a fight for survival, but a test of their very humanity. Valar, too, faced the void's core with a mixture of fear and resolve. The darkness seemed to challenge his beliefs and his sense of purpose. Yet, as he looked out into the abyss, he found a new understanding of his own role in the larger scheme of things. The void was not just a physical threat, but a reflection of his own internal struggles. The void center was a place where reality itself seemed to dissolve. It was a realm where the very concept of existence was warped, twisted into a grotesque reflection of human and Xylari fears. The Resolute and Eclipsar drifted slowly through the oppressive darkness, their lights and sensors struggling to cut through the suffocating blackness. Elaine and Valar stood at the edge of the observation deck, the vast nothingness stretching before them. The void's core was an unfathomable abyss, a swirling vortex of shadows and echoes that seemed to breathe with a life of its own. The ship's dim lights cast eerie shadows on their faces, accentuating the gravity of their situation. Elaine's breath came in shallow, uneven gasps. Each inhale seemed to draw in the very essence of the void's oppressive weight. Her gaze was fixed on the swirling darkness, her mind grappling with the enormity of their task. Valar, standing beside her, seemed equally entranced and horrified by the spectacle. "The core is not just a physical entity," Elaine said, her voice trembling slightly. "It's something more, something that reflects our deepest fears and desires." Valar nodded, his expression grave. The ancient text spoke of a consciousness within the void, an ancient intelligence born from the collective darkness of sentient beings. It's not just a force, it's a reflection of our own inner turmoil. As they approached the heart of the void, the very fabric of their reality seemed to warp. The darkness around them was no longer just an absence of light, but an oppressive force that seemed to seep into their very souls. Suddenly, the void seemed to react, its swirling darkness forming into a vaguely humanoid shape. The entity's form was amorphous and shifting, a grotesque parody of a living being. It radiated a palpable sense of malevolence, its presence suffocating and overpowering. Elaine and Valar could feel their hearts pounding in their chests, the oppressive force of the void pressing against their will. The entity's form seemed to pulsate with their deepest fears, mirroring their inner conflicts and doubts. Elaine's mind was overwhelmed by visions of her past. She saw herself as a young soldier, thrust into the chaos of war, her hands stained with the blood of countless battles. The faces of her fallen comrades flashed before her eyes, each one a haunting reminder of her failures and regrets. The void seemed to amplify these fears, distorting her memories into a nightmarish tableau. Elaine struggled to maintain her composure, but the weight of her guilt and the echoes of her past threatened to consume her. Valar, too, was confronted by the void's manifestations. He saw his people's history play out before him, the rise and fall of the Xylari Empire, the arrogance and destruction that had led to their current plight. The void's core seemed to embody the collective darkness of his civilization's past, a reflection of their hubris and their ultimate downfall. The entity's presence was a profound challenge, forcing Elaine and Valar to confront their darkest selves. The battle was not just against an external force, but against their own internal demons. Elaine took a deep breath, focusing on the core of her being. She had always been driven by a sense of duty, but now she had to confront the deeper questions of her existence. Was she defined by her past actions, or was she capable of redemption? Could she transcend her guilt and find a new purpose? Valar, too, faced a profound realization. The void's core represented not just the darkness of his civilization's past, but a reflection of his own struggles. He had been driven by a sense of duty to his people, but now he had to confront the possibility that his entire worldview was flawed. What did it mean to truly be alive? Was survival worth pursuing at the cost of one's principles? The battle against the void's core reached its climax as Elaine and Valar struggled to overcome their internal conflicts. The entity's form seemed to writhe and twist, its darkness growing more intense as it fed on their fears and doubts. Elaine felt a sudden surge of clarity amidst the chaos. She realized that the only way to defeat the void was to confront it with selflessness and courage. She had to let go of her own fears and doubts, to face the void with a resolve that transcended her own survival. Valar, too, experienced a profound moment of clarity. He understood that the void was not just a force to be battled, but a reflection of the inner conflicts that plagued all sentient beings. To confront the void was to confront oneself, to face the deepest questions of existence and purpose. Elaine and Valar's combined resolve formed a powerful force against the void. They channeled their courage and selflessness into a final, desperate effort to confront the entity. Their actions were driven by a deep sense of purpose, a commitment to something greater than their own survival. As they faced the void's core, the entity seemed to react with an almost sentient rage. The darkness swirled and coiled, its malevolent energy pushing back against their efforts. Yet, in the midst of the chaos, Elaine and Valar found a profound sense of unity and strength. Elaine's final act of selflessness was a testament to her growth and her commitment to something greater than herself. She reached out to the void's core with an open heart, facing her fears and doubts with a resolve that transcended her own survival. Valar's realization of what it meant to be truly alive was a profound moment of clarity. He understood that the void's core was a reflection of the darkness within all sentient beings, but also a challenge to confront that darkness with courage and integrity. In the end, Elaine and Valar's combined efforts succeeded in confronting the void's core. The entity's form seemed to unravel, its darkness dissipating into the void as it was confronted with the purity of their selflessness and courage. As the void's core faded into the darkness, Elaine and Valar felt a profound sense of relief and resolution. The battle had been a test of their deepest fears and doubts, but they had emerged stronger and more unified. The void's core was defeated, but the journey had left an indelible mark on them both. Elaine and Valar stood together in the aftermath, their faces marked by the strain of their ordeal. They had faced their darkest selves and emerged with a newfound understanding of their own humanity. The void's defeat was a victory not just over an external threat, but over the internal conflicts that had plagued them. As the void's core began to unravel, Elaine and Valar felt the oppressive weight of darkness lifting, replaced by a profound, almost eerie silence. The darkness that had suffocated them for so long seemed to dissolve into nothingness, leaving behind a sense of fragile calm. The once foreboding presence of the void's core was now reduced to faint ripples in the vast expanse of darkness, a shadow of its former malevolence. Elaine stumbled slightly, feeling the strain of the battle against the void's core. Her limbs were heavy, and her breath came in ragged gasps. The intensity of the confrontation had left her emotionally and physically drained. She glanced over at Valar, who was equally exhausted, but with a determined glint in his eyes. Valar, his breathing labored, turned to Elaine. "It's over," he said, his voice tinged with both relief and a deep sense of introspection. "The core is vanquished, but at what cost?" Elaine nodded, her gaze fixed on the fading remnants of the void. "We've faced something that reflects the darkest parts of ourselves. It's not just about survival, it's about understanding what it means to confront our inner demons and emerge stronger." Their dialogue was interrupted by a sudden tremor that shook the Resolute. The ship groaned as if responding to the last remnants of the void's presence. The lights flickered and dimmed, but the immediate threat seemed to have passed. In the eerie stillness that followed, Elaine and Valar took a moment to reflect on their journey. They had faced not just a cosmic threat, but a profound personal challenge. The void had forced them to confront their deepest fears and doubts, and their victory had come at a cost. Elaine looked at Valar, her expression a mixture of exhaustion and gratitude. "I never imagined that facing this void would force us to confront our own inner darkness," she said softly. "But in doing so, we found a new understanding of ourselves and each other." Valar's gaze softened as he regarded Elaine. "I had always thought of the void as a force of pure destruction," he admitted. "But it's more than that. It's a reflection of our own inner turmoil, a challenge to overcome our deepest fears and find redemption." The silence between them was filled with unspoken understanding. They had both undergone a profound transformation, one that went beyond their initial mission. The void had tested their limits and forced them to confront the very essence of their existence. As the last vestiges of the void's core faded, the darkness around them began to recede. The ship's systems slowly came back online, and the lights brightened, casting a warm glow in the observation deck. The once oppressive atmosphere was replaced by a sense of cautious optimism. Elaine and Valar exchanged a final glance, a silent acknowledgement of their shared ordeal. They had faced the heart of darkness and emerged not just as survivors, but as individuals who had found a deeper understanding of themselves and each other. The stars stretched out endlessly, a cosmic tapestry that had witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations across eons. On the bridge of the Resolute, Elaine Crow stood gazing at the expanse before her. The void had been defeated, its dark presence erased from the universe. Yet, the scars of the battle remained, both in the cold vacuum of space and within the hearts of those who had survived. Elaine's thoughts were heavy with the weight of all that had transpired. She thought of the friends they had lost, the sacrifices made, and the new beginning they now faced. The Xylari, once seen as enemies, now stood beside them, their presence no longer marked by suspicion, but by a shared understanding born of struggle. Valar joined her on the bridge, his usual stoic expression softened by the trials they had faced together. His silver eyes, once filled with distrust and calculation, now held a new light, one of curiosity and a sense of unity. "It's strange, isn't it?" he began, his voice carrying a note of reflection. "To think that we once saw each other as monsters." Elaine smiled faintly, her gaze never leaving the stars. "Perhaps that's what we needed," she said, "to see the monster within ourselves and to see that same reflection in others. It forced us to confront who we are and who we could become." Valar nodded, his mind clearly wandering through the same philosophical corridors. "Humans," he mused, "are far more complex than we ever imagined. You have the capacity for great destruction, yes, but also for profound compassion and resilience. It is a paradox that our people are only now beginning to understand." Elaine turned to him, her expression thoughtful. "And the Xylari," she replied, "are not the cold, unyielding beings we thought you to be. You are capable of reason, of empathy, and of change. Perhaps it was the void that forced us to see that truth, to look beyond our fears and assumptions." The two stood in silence for a moment, reflecting on the words that had passed between them. It was a silence filled with the weight of what had been lost, but also with the hope of what could still be gained. The void had been a catalyst, forcing both species to confront not just an external enemy, but the darkness within themselves. Valar finally spoke, his voice tinged with a sense of purpose. "Our people have much to learn from each other," he said. "If we are to survive in a universe as vast and indifferent as this, we must do so together. The void is not the only threat out there, it is merely a reflection of the challenges we must face. Alone, we are vulnerable. Together, we have a chance." Elaine nodded, feeling a deep sense of agreement. "We've seen what happens when we allow fear and mistrust to drive us apart," she said. "But we've also seen the power of unity, of standing together in the face of the unknown. That is our last hope, the choice to unite rather than divide, to build rather than destroy." The intercom chimed, and a voice crackled through, breaking the reflective silence. "Captain Crow, Xylari Envoy Valar, the council is ready to convene." Elaine took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment settle on her shoulders. "It's time," she said, turning to Valar. "Time to shape the future, together." They made their way to the council chamber, where representatives from both species had gathered. The room was filled with a mixture of anticipation, tension, and cautious optimism. The events of the past weeks had shaken both sides to their core, but it had also opened the door to a new beginning. Elaine and Valar took their seats at the head of the chamber, and the room fell silent. The humans and Xylari looked to them, the leaders who had brought them through the darkness and into a fragile new dawn. Elaine spoke first, her voice steady and strong. "We stand here today, not as humans and Xylari, but as survivors of a shared nightmare," she began. "The void tested us in ways we could never have imagined, forcing us to confront not only an external enemy, but our own inner demons. And yet, here we are together." She paused, letting her words settle over the room. The void showed us what happens when we allow fear, hatred, and mistrust to fester. But it also showed us the power of unity, of standing together in the face of the unknown. If we are to move forward, we must do so with open hearts and open minds. We must be willing to see each other not as enemies, but as allies, as partners in a shared quest for survival and understanding. Valar spoke next, his voice filled with a new sense of conviction. "The Xylari have long believed in the supremacy of logic and order, but we have learned that there is more to existence than cold calculation," he said. "We have seen the strength of human courage, the power of their resolve, and the depth of their compassion. These are qualities that we must embrace if we are to thrive in a universe as vast and unpredictable as this." He turned to Elaine, a small smile playing at the corner of his lips. "And perhaps," he added, "we have learned that there is more to ourselves than we once thought. The void has been vanquished, but the real challenge begins now, the challenge of building a future that honors the sacrifices made and the lessons learned." The room erupted in a mixture of applause and contemplation. The path ahead would not be easy, but there was a sense of hope that permeated the chamber, a hope born from the shared realization that they were stronger together than apart. As the council continued, Elaine found herself lost in thought. She thought of all the lives that had been lost, all the sacrifices that had been made, and all the challenges that lay ahead. But she also thought of the bonds that had been forged, the understanding that had been gained, and the potential for a future defined not by fear, but by hope. Valar leaned over, his voice low. "What are you thinking, Captain?" Elaine smiled, her gaze distant, but filled with a quiet determination. "I'm thinking that this is just the beginning," she replied. "We have a lot of work to do, a lot of bridges to build, and a lot of healing to undertake. But for the first time in a long time, I feel like we have a real chance." Valar nodded, his expression mirroring her sentiment. "Then let us make it count," he said, "for those who came before us, and for those who will come after." Elaine nodded, feeling a sense of resolve settle over her. The void was gone, but the journey was far from over. There were new worlds to explore, new challenges to face, and new relationships to build. The universe was vast and often indifferent, but within its cold expanse, they had found a flicker of hope, a hope that would guide them forward, together. And so, the alliance between humans and Xylari became more than a necessity. It became a symbol of what was possible when old fears were cast aside in favor of understanding, when the darkness within was faced and overcome, and when two species, once enemies, chose to walk a path of unity and hope amid the stars. The stars stretched out before them, a new horizon waiting to be explored, a horizon filled not with darkness, but with the promise of what could be.